Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Finance. Today is Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. We have 8 bills for hearing today, and we are going to go in the following order. Senate Bill 162, Senator Lamb, Senate Bill 140, Senate Bill 19, Senate Bill 108, Senate Bill 59, Senate Bill 117, and Senate Bill 90. We have witnesses signed up on every bill. We have some in-person witnesses. We have some virtual witnesses. For the audience, we're going to be taking the in-person witnesses on each bill first, and then we'll go to the virtual witnesses. We will have sponsors do their presentation, and then each additional witness will have 2 minutes for their presentation. An alarm will go off after your 2 minutes have expired. We ask everyone to please, if you have not already, turn off the ringer on your cell phone so that it doesn't interfere with our sound system. And I think that is all I have by way of housekeeping. We'll go ahead and begin with Senate Bill 162. Senator Lamb, you may come forward, and I believe you have a panel with you. So if you want to bring your panel forward or have them come forward.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes.
And good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay. All right. Give me a moment while I wait for my mic to be turned on, because I don't want to touch the button. Yeah, come on up. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here before the Senate Finance Committee. I'm pleased to be joined by Howard County Executive Dr. Calvin Ball, Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, and also Dr. Safari, who I believe has been before this committee before. And so good afternoon, members of the committee, Chair Griffith, for the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator in District 12. Pleased to be here to be able to introduce Senate Bill 162, which seeks to update the Maryland Aviation Commission to ensure that we're considering the health impacts of air traffic while we're making decisions about BWI Airport. Over the past few years, communities near and around BWI have been experiencing a significant increase in air traffic noise. This has mostly been experienced in Howard County, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, and Montgomery County. And this is due to changes that were made by the Federal Aviation Administration back in 2017. In addition to being a quality of life issue for the constituents of Senator Beidel, Senator Alfrith, others, and myself, there have been a recent study that was actually supported by the General Assembly that showed that the increased air traffic noise will be a significant health issue over the next 30 years. Although the Maryland Aviation Administration, the MAA, does a lot of important work to support BWI Airport, we feel that it could be more responsive to the health impacts of BWI and the community surrounding the airport and to the General Assembly. And Dr. Safari, who was the lead author of that study, will be able to speak to those study results as well. Before I go further into the bill, I'd like to highlight the extent of the issues that we're hoping to address with this bill. That's why I do have some limited slides here. I appreciate Ms. Kraft's help with putting this and sharing this together with all of you, but it's an important visual. There we go. As I've just noted, the noise concerns are a huge problem for the residents in these counties. In 2020 alone, there were over 500,000 noise complaints made in relation to noise generated from the consolidated flight patterns that the Next Gen program instituted. Basically, back in 2017, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, implemented a new air traffic control system, the Next Gen program, that has led to some changes, as you'll see in the subsequent slides, with air traffic over some of our local communities. This map shows the general clustering of noise complaints from BWI. As you can see, they're mostly in Howard and Anne Arundel County, but there are also some significant complaints coming from Montgomery County, Baltimore County, and even Carroll County. Over the past few years, the Federal Aviation Administration has been implementing a new traffic control system, as I mentioned, which was Next Gen. Next Gen system is supposed to have some benefits. It's reportedly intended to reduce fuel consumption by allowing planes to fly more direct and compact flight routes and also be able to increase the number of takeoff and landings at the airport. However, the NextGen system has resulted in significant increases in air traffic noise in communities under the flight paths. On the left side of this subsequent map, you can see the flight plans out of BWI prior to the introduction of NextGen. And on the right is a map of flight plans under NextGen. As you can see, with the purple arrivals and the green departures, there have been significantly more concentrated flights over narrower bands of areas, which have increased the frequency at which residents have planes flying over their homes. What isn't captured on this map is the fact that NextGen uses also more gradual climbs and descents. That means that the noise is actually increased with the gradual climbs because the engines have to throttle for a longer period, also at greater noise, and also with a more gliding descent, they also have to throttle the engines more as well because they have to maintain a certain airspeed to continue flight. These two factors together mean that the air traffic noise from BWI has increased significantly and is being experienced much further from BWI than in the past. It also means that many homes that were not exposed to air traffic noise when they were initially purchased by homeowners are now being exposed to significant noise, and homes that would experience infrequent air traffic noise are now experiencing near constant noise. The increased air traffic noise isn't merely an annoyance, it has real health impacts for residents living under these flight paths. Air traffic noise has been linked to several adverse health outcomes such as heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, and anxiety. 2 years ago, in 2020, 3 years ago, the General Assembly included funding in the budget to have the University of Maryland, Baltimore do a study on the health impacts of the increased air traffic noise, and we wanted to highlight at least the top line of the finding of that study. Dr. Safari, our lead author here, found that due to the increased air traffic noise, we can expect increases in cardiovascular disease, anxiety, low birth weight in and around the communities near BWI. Additionally, Dr. Safari found that over the next 30 years, the economic development of these health impacts could be around $800 million to the state. BWI is an important economic resource for our state, but I don't think that the airport is always considering the surrounding community when making some of its decisions on how to maximize the economic value for the state. BWI is also unique in that it is a state-owned airport. Unlike many other airports in most metropolitan urban areas, those airports are oftentimes owned by a metropolitan authority coming together to be able to collectively own the airport. BWI and Martin State Airport are actually both state-owned airports, so we are in a unique category in that regard. Additionally, because of this, we think it's important to weigh the economic value of the airport against potential health costs. Under this bill, we are designating 4 of the 9 Maryland Aviation Administration Commission seats for individuals recommended by the BWI Community Roundtable, which represents the communities around BWI and has been meeting on a regular basis over the last couple years to provide input to both the federal and state government on BWI noise concerns. Additionally, the bill tasks the Commission with considering how to best mitigate the potential negative impacts from the airport. We believe this is an important balance to the Commission's current task of developing policies to improve and promote the airport. Additionally, we have a requirement that the Maryland Aviation Administration's annual report include information about what the agency has done to support the health of communities around BWI. And lastly, the bill requires an orientation for the Maryland Aviation Commission members about the role and responsibilities of the Commission itself. We believe these are moderate and reasonable updates to the Maryland Aviation Administration Commission, and we do not feel that this will significantly impact the work of the Commission or BWI, but will allow the General Assembly to ensure that the decisions regarding BWI are made in a comprehensive and holistic way. I do want to take a moment to address the fiscal note, and this is something that many of our colleagues here in the General Assembly may be familiar with. Having looked at the fiscal note itself, I think this is truly a case of great inflation. This is a case of fiscal note inflation. The fiscal note itself says that the bill would increase costs by over $300,000, in part because of a new member orientation to the Commission and for hiring new staff. And it states that it would need 3 new staff members to be able to provide proper input to the commissioners as they consider and make their decisions. Overall, I think this cost is greatly inflated. There should not be any significant need for staffing increases to deal with the provisions of this bill. Honestly, I think this is a real stretch, and the agency, I do not believe, needs new staff. If the agency wants to oppose the bill, I think it's fine. They can be forthright and upcoming with it, but I am concerned about the fact that they're playing games with this fiscal note. Additionally, the fiscal note states that MAA believes the bill could increase costs by requiring it to administer a noise abatement program. So if you look at the fiscal note in the further pages, it says that a noise abatement program would need to be created as a result of this. That program is not even stated in this bill. It's not a purpose of this bill. This is really just to be able to have the commission consider additional elements as part of its charter and take those into account as it makes its decisions. I also want to note that the staff, my office, and I have reached out several times to the Maryland Aviation Administration staff asking for input and feedback, and we received nothing in response. The letter that was submitted, which is in your packets, publicly to the committee yesterday, was its first and only response that we've heard back. I'm just disappointed that in spite of our good faith effort on our part, the agency has declined to be constructive in even having a conversation with me and the other Senate co-sponsors during the development of this bill. And I hope we can continue to have a forthright conversation with the commission to be able to see if we can come to an agreement on some of these provisions. And so with that, let me close and pass it along to others on this sponsor panel.
Thank you, Senator. Do you want to proceed with your panel, and then we'll take questions after that?
Well, I can't play favorites between my two county executives, so
You
I'll
want me to-
defer to whoever wants to go first there.
How about we call on the county executive who has the mic turned on right in front of him? I'll do it. County Executive Ball, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klausmeier, and the esteemed members of the Finance Committee. As was stated, I'm your Howard County Executive, Calvin Ball, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon alongside Senator Lamb and my fellow County Executive, Stuart Pittman. I appreciate Senator Lamb's and his co-sponsors for their consistent advocacy for eliminating adverse environmental and health impacts on our communities. And Senate Bill 162 would bring much-needed balance to aviation policies impacting BWI and ultimately our constituents. This legislation is needed to address the significant gap in Maryland's transportation and public health policy. I'm encouraged that the design of this bill recognizes the imperative nature of ensuring we continue to reap the social and economic benefits of our airports while striving to protect and enhance the quality of life in our communities. We can have both. Howard County and our volunteer members of the DC Metroplex BWI Community Roundtable have been working to alleviate the impacts of the NextGen system since March of 2017, when the roundtable was formed. And as a former Howard County Council member, I sponsored local legislation authorizing legal action against the FAA. In 2019, we filed a second legal petition against the FAA following the approval of the BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport expansion plan, a plan that lacked consideration of the adverse noise impacts to residents in the area. In 2022, Howard and Anne Arundel counties engaged a consulting firm to provide us with additional data regarding the level of noise in our communities and how those noise levels may change under revised flight patterns. The Commission would address a significant gap in Maryland's transportation and public health policy. As County Executive, it's my goal to ensure that all of our residents are thriving and healthy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir. We'll hear from Anne Arundel County Executive. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Senator Griffith and Senator Klausmeier and everybody on this committee. We came forward with a bill last year that would have certainly had a higher fiscal note, that would have required an entity to do work in addition to what the Aviation Authority does. And I like this bill because it's simple and there are no costs that I can see other than that different people will be appointed to the Aviation Authority, and it will include representatives from the community surrounding the airport from the roundtable. And I just think that's good public policy for any large institution like that, to have some community representation. The number listed here is 4. That's not where I would be stuck. I think the key is that we have some representation from the roundtable, the folks that they pick. And it is true that the Aviation Authority has supported some changes in the flight paths, and that the FAA has said no, and there has been some support on the agenda of those residents. But I think that having those residents on the Maryland Aviation Authority is going to, commission is going to actually ensure that the residents know that their agenda really is being listened to, and they can be creative about other ideas. But I also just want to say that the airport is a huge economic driver for our county and for our region, and I think we should listen to the businesses that surround the airport and the authority itself, and hear what impacts they believe this might have there. But it's good public policy to engage the community, and that's why we support this bill.
Thank you. With 27 seconds to spare, we'll go to Dr. Zafari. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Zafar Zafari. I'm a faculty at University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. I'm here to support the bill. Maybe I can quickly speak to the study that we have conducted. And obviously, if there's any question, I'm happy to answer afterwards. So this is, we basically, I'm very happy that we actually were involved in this study. This is a mathematical model that we built based upon the published data that basically compared after next-gen implementation versus prior to next-gen implementation, and projected the population in Maryland according to different noise contours, and projecting the lifetime over different time horizons, 30 years, and smaller than that, 10 years, 20 years, the economic and health burden of noise, aircraft noise, that otherwise would be, the burden would be incurred by either the insurance company, the insurers, the federal government, or the societal burden. So we looked at different health impacts, multiple health impacts of aircraft noise, including cardiovascular diseases, risk of hospitalizations of cardiovascular, level of annoyance of people after exposure to different noise contours, low birth weight, which is a novelty of this study. I think for the first time we looked at economic burden of low birth weight as a result of aircraft noise in the States, and anxiety. So all these are multiple health impacts. This is a mathematical model that allows people to transition between different health states over time. The model is flexible to even project the future population growth, like if you have any children born in the future. And then, so in terms of the results, basically we looked at both health and economic dimensions. We modeled both incremental morbidity cost in terms of cardiovascular disease, anxiety, and low birth weight. If I can speak to that, over 30 years, they discounted just the morbidity cost. This is a direct cost that the insurer has to pay, is about $100 million. The anxiety costs about $84 million, and low birth weight is about $18 million, which is significant. And on top of it, we modeled the mortality costs based upon the value of a statistical life, obviously. And the cardiovascular disease is something about $500,000 over 30 years, and low birth weight is another $68 million. So in total would be $800 million over 30 years in terms of the total economic burden that the society will be incurred. So I'm happy here to answer any questions, follow-up questions. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there, Senator Ellis has a question.
Thank you, Senator Lamb, for this bill, and executives and doctor. And I just want to kind of ask a question. It's a difficult issue. The health burdens are proven by science, but I fly into BWI most of the times. It's my airport of choice, and I look out the window, and up to like really close to the runways are buildings and homes, and typically, and I've seen this I'm a former Air Force officer, and we built airports, we built, say, even air bases and out from population areas, and the population squeezed close to the airport or air facility. So is there really a solution to this problem when the population squeezes in so close to these essential facilities and, taking off, airplane have to go full throttle, right? There's no way they can take off quietly. And so I'm just wondering, even if we pass this bill and change the board, what can be done to mitigate some of the problems, whether it's just the noise or down to the health effect? Is there any solutions in your wheelhouse as far as that's concerned, please?
So thank you, Senator. Let me start, and then let the other witnesses on the panel respond as well. I want to be clear, this is not a noise bill. This is a bill to allow the Aviation Administration's commission to weigh different considerations in some of the policies that they're promoting for the airport. And so its intent is really just to be able to take a more balanced approach. I think any agency where they're both the regulator and the promoter has a very difficult job, right? And on the federal level, we saw that with the FAA, which is, as similar to the MAA, is both a promoter and a regulator, and sometimes they don't get that right, as we saw with the 737 MAX 8 kind of situation. And so in this instance, it's not to eliminate all noise, and there's no noise abatement program even built into this bill. It's really just to have and ensure that the commission that provides top-level policy guidance to the BWI airport is able to provide a balanced approach in some of the perspectives that they are putting forward as part of the commission. To your second point about the technical pieces of the noise itself and requiring to throttle, particularly during takeoff and also during landing, I think we have some technical experts coming up in subsequent panels that can speak to maybe a bit more of the technical pieces of that. But when it comes to the next-gen system, what has changed is that folks have bought homes where they previously had not experienced this level of noise before, that something changed over them, and that's the next-gen flight path 5-6 years ago that made the noise increase significantly over what it was. I understand that airports were located probably in the 20s and 30s where they were initially at, and then development occurred closer and closer to the airport. Certainly that's understandable. A lot of those folks that are close to the airport bought their homes knowing that the airport was close by, and the values of their homes were, reflected that. What has since happened is that with the next-gen system, we have areas very far out from the airport now that are experiencing noise to a much greater degree that had not heard that even just 6-7 years ago.
And if I may, thank you so much for that thoughtful question, Senator Ellis. I would concur with Senator Lamb. First of all, implicit in County Executive Pittman's testimony was the fact that we all support BWI Thurgood Marshall. This empowers and gives voice to our residents and constituents. And it ensures that when there has been an increased concentration and undue burden to some constituents, that's not fair, and that they should have a voice in addressing some of these issues. And so that's where I think the heart of this bill is, so that we can have a balanced approach that supports an important amenity to our community, our state, and our region, while also supporting our residents.
So I'm just kind of concerned. So under this new FAA system, basically the flight path is more diffused, more dispersed. Is that correct?
No, it's more concentrated, actually. It's narrower, and there's more frequency of airplanes flying over the exact same path. And that's what's causing greater noise for those local communities under that.
So, okay, I thought you said that communities that were not impacted before are impacted. More communities are impacted now than on the previous
I think if you look at some of the maps in your slides, you'll see that by narrowing the flight path, it's actually creating more concentrated highways of noise above people, and it's actually extending it further out, probably because of the throttling and de-throttling. And so those changes are significant. And we've heard from communities, and we've been hearing from many communities over the last 6 years of those concerns extending very far out from the airport. It is why both our federal partners and our state colleagues and local colleagues have filed complaints and concerns with the FAA, that there are lawsuits even from former Attorney General Frosch to the FAA requiring them to do something about this and making adjustments to the next-gen system to reduce the disruption of noise over some of these communities. Even former Governor Larry Hogan signed on to this, those are, and as well as our federal senators, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Cardin, also signed on to this. There's been a unified push across all levels of government to try to get FAA to be more responsive when it comes to next-gen. And I think there are some things that the federal agency can make adjustments to when it comes to next-gen to mitigate some of the impacts in local communities. They're, I think, still considering them, but they haven't moved forward with any of them, and they've been incredibly slow with responsiveness to this. I think some of the other folks that understand the technical pieces of actually flying an airplane can probably speak to this a little bit more than myself, but there are technical alternatives to next-gen, while still within the next-gen system, to be able to help reduce some of the impact to our local communities. They have not been taken up by FAA.
Yeah, so if we change the board and have it such a large number of folks from, say, the community groups, say they're from one community, right? So I guess, and they are given the authority, they can move the traffic to somebody else's community, and the other community will have this problem. And maybe if that community that have all the traffic now is not as affluent as that other community who members became the board members, then you have just a displaced burden to, what do you call it, fence line communities. Have you thought about that as far as?
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you,
balance?
Senator Ellis. And we tried to take that into account when we crafted this bill. So there's a few provisions in there that help try to address this. One, it's actually not adding new members to the commission. It's that new commissioners that would be coming on board would be selected from a list that's being provided by the BWI Community Roundtable. Over the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a community body that has met with representatives from state legislators as well, serving on that community roundtable, that have met on a regular basis to provide input to MAA as well as FAA. And so the list of potential individuals that would serve on the commission would come from that BWI community roundtable that has a cross-section of representatives there. It's not new folks being added. It's basically taking 4 seats and making sure that there's additional public input into those seats.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for this panel? Thank you all very much for your testimony and your time. We are now going to bring forward Dan Woomer, Debbie McDonald, Megan Lynch, and Laura Donovan. If you're here, please come forward.
Yes, I am behind the mask.
Okay, good afternoon. You can, the mics do move if you need them to, so you can start your testimony.
You can go first.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Lee Woomer, resident of Linthicum Heights, a neighbor of the BWI Marshall Airport, and a voting member of the BWI Roundtable. I encourage the Finance Committee members to vote in favor of the changes proposed in Senate Bill 162. Part of the purpose of the DC Metroplex BWI Community Roundtable is to evaluate the noise and other environmental effects on communities and residents neighboring BWI Marshall, and to identify possible alternative routings and procedures to mitigate concentrations of noise and jet engine exhaust particulate pollution on the surrounding communities brought on with FAA's implementation of next-gen flight management procedures. The roundtable has accomplished much. Following over 6 years of research and numerous discussions and meetings with FAA, MDOT, MAA, BWI, Southwest, Maryland General Assembly, community members, and anybody who we could talk to, our group of volunteers worked long hours to develop a series of flight path changes for FAA's consideration. These proposed changes would help mitigate the noise and pollution over the higher populated areas of Anne Arundel and Howard counties. At the end of 2022, FAA announced that they had accepted the roundtable proposals and have begun the process to make incremental flight path changes to try to alleviate the concentration of noise over the more highly densely populated areas of Anne Arundel and Howard counties. Working with contractor Vinair, the roundtable started development of an Anne Arundel and Howard counties noise model. This work is a significant step in monitoring and quantifying the noise concentrations across the airport's neighboring communities. These are all small steps, but they're moving forward. We have having 4 members of the Maryland Aviation Commission being identified and vetted by the roundtable, selected from communities impacted by the airport's noise and particulate pollution, is a logical next step. Therefore, I encourage the Finance Committee members to vote in favor of Senate Bill 162.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'm Debbie McDonald, current chair of the DC Metroplex BWI Community Roundtable. The BWI Roundtable has been actively trying to understand and seek solutions to the explosion of aviation impacts in the region for almost 6 years. As a result, we've come to a much better understanding of how the citizens of Maryland directly benefit from having a safe, reliable, and economically vibrant airport. We also understand that the citizens of Maryland deserve healthy, peaceful lives in their chosen communities. There's no reason we can't have both in the state of Maryland. Growth in operations at BWI Marshall brings many positive impacts to the state of Maryland, including economic development, jobs, and tax revenue. However, ill-considered growth can result in significant negative impacts, especially for residents of Anne Arundel and Howard County. These include stress, adverse health outcomes, and a diminished quality of life. As we heard in Dr. Safari's testimony today, the University of Maryland Baltimore study really increased our understanding of some of the real costs of these impacts. We're not seeking to curtail airport operations, but to seek balanced, data-driven, and fully informed solutions that include communities as formal stakeholders in airport decisions going forward. We need better balance between economic growth at BWI and the interests of residents and communities. For these reasons, we respectfully request the committee grant Senate Bill 162 a favorable report. I just want to note, our last meeting, the BWI Roundtable passed a resolution to support SB 162 and HB 204 and to fully accept the responsibilities that it entails. Thank you.
Okay, it's on. My name is Laura Donovan. I am a very close resident to BWI Airport. I'm approximately 1 to 2 miles from the general aviation runway and also the heliport. And I can testify to the health effects, and I'm also very sleep deprived, including today, so bear with me. Last year, I talked about how it had impacted my life, and apparently it didn't make an impact because here we are again. One thing, if it's not seen fit that residents shouldn't have a say, we're not stakeholders. Our federal senators I read an article and said that Senator Van Hollen, Cardin, and Congressman Sarbanes had gotten for us $231,000 and never mind. It was a lot, okay? So anyway, at this point, the federal taxpayers are now stakeholders. That was not baggage fees, terminal fees, what have you. Basically, they always say they're self-sufficient. This time, they're not. And these were through, and bear with me again, the American Rescue Plan and the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. So, if we had voluntarily taken our money to an airline or a company, given it to them, we would have received shares in their company. We would have been able to attend a yearly stockholder meeting. We would get a vote at that point in time. That is, what I'm getting out of this with no legal expertise is that That's all we're asking for here, is to be able to interject some information to people who make decisions so that everyone can understand what exactly is going on. And one thing I have very much knowledge in this, you don't get it unless you're there. You can tell this to people how bad it is. They just don't get it. You have to be there. I know that you all do field trips. That might be a good one. Come out and see for yourself. We're not making it up. We're not crazy. We're not weaklings. It's really, really bad. So that's all I got. And thank you for your time. Please pass this out favorably this year. We really need the help. Still need the help. One more year in, we still need the help. So thanks for listening.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
for your testimony. I don't see, oh, Senator Lamb has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the members of the BWI Roundtable, because I think this was to the point that Senator Ellis had brought up earlier, which is, have there been recommendations from the Roundtable to FAA in terms of modifications that can be considered by the agency within the confines of NextGen to help mitigate some of the noise that we're hearing in our local communities? I'm not the technical expert. It doesn't look like you're aviators either, but you're probably familiar with the recommendations that have come forward from the Roundtable. If you can speak to that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, our technical committee could probably answer better, but I can give it a good shot because they have developed quite a bit of knowledge and are good at conveying it to us. We have been through it's been a long process of putting together and submitting these suggested changes, working with the FAA, the MAA, and contractors to make sure that, it was doable. They have just gotten to the point where they have made it through the process and they presented it to us, and then it had to go through some more, it has to go to NEPA, through the NEPA process and everything. But we are at the point where we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel, that some of those changes would be made. They are not going to solve the entire problem. I was very impressed with, when I joined the Roundtable, with the fact that they had managed to come up with a way to work within that process and to make progress working within a known process of the FAA and the MAA. So I'm hopeful that it will actually come to fruition. And Dan, yeah, I'm sure you have something.
A couple of thoughts. To answer your question, one word, yes, we have made recommendations. And what FAA did, and these are extremely tiny changes, but we think they're going to make a big impact. As you saw in that one visual, where when NextGen was put in, you have the route concentrations. They're like highways in the sky now. So literally, we have where there's planes flying every 3 minutes, okay, over people's homes, okay? What our group did, the technical committee did a phenomenal job. This was working with Southwest, with pilots, with FAA, with people who really knew the airport and knew flight and understand NextGen. They were able to shift a few navigation points. So on arrivals and departures, to shift the flight path slightly, like a mile to the east or a mile to the north, to move it over less concentrated, population concentrated areas, or industrial or open areas. So it's, again, this is not going to solve the problem. The noise is going to be there, that's the way it is, okay? But it makes an incremental improvement. And what we're looking to continue to do is keep looking at this and say, are there minor ways that we can, or ways working within the system that we can keep making improvements to reduce the load? And Senator Ellis, I'd like to point out one thing. When Friendship Airport came into existence, Linthicum already existed, and it was mostly developed. So did Ferndale and a good chunk of Ben Bernie. So the airport came in, it was very quiet, and it wasn't much of a disturbance at all. As it has grown, and what really did this was NextGen. By concentrating these flights into these narrow paths, you have, again, plane after plane, that's just one right behind the other, that's coming over the more highly populated areas of our counties, and it literally shakes the houses. Okay, so what we're trying to do is see if we can make some incremental improvement here. I hope that helps.
And that's helpful, and Ms. McDonald, thanks for sharing that too. And to put it into context, it's taken 6 years to get this far in constant communications with FAA to make these small incremental changes. And I think the intent of this bill is to be proactive so that when future changes are being considered by MAA and also by FAA, there will be broader public input into that process. Because we recognize that BWI is not going away. We don't want it to go away. We want it to do well. We want it to succeed, but we also want it to have a balanced approach to how we can help promote business in the BWI area and with the airport itself, and this will help, hopefully, provide that balanced approach. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Isn't that so? Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for this panel? Thank you all very much for your testimony. Have a good afternoon. I'm calling again Megan Lynch.
If I could point out quickly,
Oh.
we all used to coexist together
Ma'am,
peacefully.
Okay, thank you
Just
so much.
saying.
Thank you for your testimony. Have a great afternoon. All right, we have Gina Stewart, who signed up in opposition to the bill. Is she here? Okay, and then following her, we'll have one virtual witness. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klausmeier, and members of the Senate Committee. My name is Gina Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of the BWI Business Partnership, which is a business organization of approximately 200 member companies. As reflected in our written testimony, as well as other letters of opposition that we submitted in a package, we are concerned that the passage of this bill, Senate Bill 162, will negatively impact the ability of BWI Marshall Airport to make the necessary improvements that it needs to serve its businesses and residents of the state of Maryland, such as a new baggage handling system. I'm sure you all saw the picture after Christmas of all those bags sitting there from the Southwest stuff. That can look like that all the time, okay? So we need the airport to do what it needs to do to service our customers. We realize that noise is a very important issue, and it must be addressed. There are some current stats that I'd like to quickly share. In 2021, there were more than 620,000 complaints. The interesting note was that was from 520 unique complainants, serving a 2.8 million population. Please keep in mind that the airport also serves over 20 million passengers. So we support the MAA and the BWI Roundtable in their efforts to have the FAA make improvements to the current next-gen flight patterns. And as it was mentioned earlier, this is a FAA issue. MAA cannot change the flight patterns. And so we applaud all the efforts of the Roundtables thus far with the FAA. The MAA also is working with the Residential Sound Insulation Program, the MDOT MAA Noise and Operations Monitoring System, the Airport Noise and Part 150 Noise Studies, and the Proactive Facility Planning through NEPA. Our biggest concern is overrepresentation of one priority interest of the Commission can have a negative impact on the airport. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. And Senator Lamb has a question. Senator?
Yes, sir.
Just have one follow-up question. Thank you, Madam Chair. The bill proposes only a minority of new input from residents in this. And so, I think the intent is not to, scramble plans for a new baggage claim area and the systems that are ongoing there at BWI. The commission itself has a charge also to help promote and support BWI. This is intended to take a more balanced approach. I'm curious as to why you think having 4 members out of 9 would scramble a lot of those plans that you cited earlier.
Yes, sir. I think, that's 44% of the commission. And I think that we feel that they have one issue, and we just feel like it's a one interest only from almost half of the commission. We know it's not a majority. However, if there are other members of the commission that may not be at that meeting at approval time, it could be a majority. And so I think that we feel like there should be that representation. I think we're just very concerned at the number. I don't know if I answered your question, sir.
Kind of, but
Kind of?
but not. I guess I'm just failing to understand how adding one consideration to the charge of the commission would cause all of these to not occur, right? Whether it's new baggage claims, promoting the airport, supporting the airport, but taking into one factor into consideration, it's not the only factor. We're not asking the commission to only look at noise issues and health
Correct.
issues. It's just one amongst many to address with the airport.
I guess, I'm equating it to any one interest group to a commission. I just don't know if that's as diverse as it could be, to make sure that all interests are looking and not just from a noise perspective, I guess, is our concern, that might be from that group, that's really their main concern is, okay, with every decision, it's always a noise concern versus maybe a different environmental concern or something else. I think that's what I'm trying to convey.
Okay, thank you. All the commissioners go through executive nominations for confirmation, so we as senators also have an ability to weigh in on this. Thank you.
Isn't that so? Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you so much.
testimony. We do have one virtual witness, Jamie Banks. Good afternoon. We're still on Senate Bill 162, and you can proceed with your testimony. I think you need to unmute. There you go.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jamie Banks. I'm a health and environmental scientist. I serve as president of Quiet Communities. We're a national nonprofit organization, and I also chair the Noise and Health Committee of the American Public Health Association. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on Senate Bill 162, which would expand the duties and membership of the Maryland Aviation Commission. Decades of research show that noise and pollution from transportation in general and aviation in particular are harmful to health. Especially vulnerable are airport workers, children, seniors, and those with pre-existing conditions. Aircraft noise disrupts activities and sleep and causes stress responses that increase high blood pressure and the risks of heart disease, stroke, and mortality. It contributes to anxiety and depression. Low-frequency noise and nighttime aviation noise are especially hazardous. A recent study showed that quieter skies during the pandemic actually improved cardiovascular health. Aviation noise impairs children's learning and cognitive development. Sound insulation in affected schools and airport relocation away from schools have both been shown to reverse those effects. Aviation noise impairs work productivity. It can adversely affect quality of life and feelings of well-being and create a sense of despair and powerlessness in those who are affected. Aircraft emissions contain fine and ultrafine particulate matter. Fine particulate matter is a human carcinogen known to cause diseases ranging from lung and heart disease to cancer, reproductive and developmental disorders, and premature death. Emissions in communities under concentrated flight paths are of particular concern. Noise and particulate matter air pollution have been associated with development of dementia. Noise and pollution are also environmental stressors, diminishing environmental quality and contributing to loss of biodiversity. I'm almost finished here. Thank you.
Please,
All
yeah.
of these impacts come with staggering economic costs. Expanding the duties of the Maryland Aviation Commission to include consideration of health and environmental impacts as required by Bill 162 would position it to better serve all citizens of Maryland, including members who are designated by the BWI Roundtable, would provide the necessary expertise and understanding to achieve these goals. I therefore urge you to pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I see no questions from the committee, so please have a good afternoon. And colleagues, that will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 162. We're now going to move to Senate Bill 140. Senator Jackson, thank you for your patience, sir. He will be presenting Senate Bill 140, State Highway Administration Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge designation. And Senator, you can bring your panelist up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. I see our good friend George Owens here. Good to see you, sir.
Madam Chair, awfully good
Former
to see you.
secretary
Vice
and
Chair.
colleague. Yeah.
Those of you I've served with in the past, nice to be with
Yes,
you
you
today.
have.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. We are certainly honored to have a distinguished panel here, including my friend and my Marine, George Owens. So thank you for your service. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Finance Committee, I'm Senator Michael Jackson, representing District 27, Calvert, Charles, and Prince George's counties. Senate Bill 140 is a very straightforward bill that designates the bridge across Fishing Creek on Maryland Route 261 in Calvert County as the Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge. This is a simple piece of legislation introduced in conjunction with the representatives of the town of Chesapeake, our former Secretary of Veteran Affairs, and members of our Public Safety Service, North Beach Firehouse. It's my distinct honor to work on this legislation with one of the three mayors, Mayor Pat Mahoney, as well as others. This simple piece of legislation is to better recognize the service and sacrifice of residents who paid the ultimate sacrifice in the service of their country and the service for the residents of their counties, military and public safety service. As someone who served in both of these arenas, this bill is particularly important to me, and it doesn't need a grandiose explanation. So with that, Madam Chair and the committee, we're hoping for a favorable report, and I, in your order, in your designation, would love to have this panel to discuss this bill further. Thank you.
Thank you. You can proceed, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to be before you all, albeit on a different plane that I'm usually before you on. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, with the exception of Senator Geis, who I wanted to introduce myself to a little while ago, I know all of you, as we've served together. Kathy, you and I go back 30-some years here. I know, you don't look a day over 20. Did that hurt my chances for passage? Be that as it may, this is about as simple a bill as you will face all session long. And it comes from one of the counties, the smallest county in the state. We call it Calvert County. You know it as Calvert. 415 square miles. Arguably, our total population is less than some of the cities of this great state. With that said, we are forced to come here to ask simply for a name authorization for a bridge in our county. That's all it does. Why? Because we're still a commissioner form of government, not code home rule, and certainly not charter. We're going to work on that, though, try to bring ourselves into the 21st century shortly. But right now, we're not there. So we need you to approve Senator Jackson's very, very fine bill. What a wonderful tribute to those men and women who have served in combat, those men and women who have served as firefighters and police officers, and all first responders who have given up their lives for our protection. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. You can just slide the mic, and yes, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senators, my name's Chris Mills. I'm the Fire Chief of the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department in Calvert County. Thank you for this opportunity before you to support Senate Bill 140, designating the bridge crossing Fishing Creek as a Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge. I'm here today speaking on behalf of all the fallen heroes from the North Beach Fire Department, as well as our active and retired first responders. Dedicating the bridge as a Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge is a fitting tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice and service to this community and will serve as a visual reminder to the public of the first responders' commitment to saving lives, protecting property, and preserving the common good. We are a community-based public safety organization, and this designation will illustrate to the citizens of the community we serve, North Beach, Chesapeake Beach, Calvert County, and Anne Arundel County, that we are committed to our mission, service above self, even at the risk of our own lives. Our fire trucks, ambulances, deputy sheriffs, vehicles cross Fishing Creek Bridge dozens of times each week. Fire calls, medical calls, law enforcement calls. The men and women of the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department and our law enforcement partners selflessly give of their time and, when necessary, risk their lives to keep Maryland safe. Sadly, in the 96 years since its founding, the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department has experienced 2 line-of-duty deaths. 2018, Rescue Captain Patricia Pat Osborne suffered a fatal medical emergency while transporting a patient. In 1970, firefighter Larry Yates Cox suffered fatal injuries after falling from an engine while responding to a marsh fire. In addition, when the town of North Beach had its own police department, 2 officers died in the line of duty. Sergeant Edward Clarence Wilson suffered a medical emergency while on duty. Policeman Edward G. Robinson suffered fatal injuries while breaking up a disturbance in Randall's Cliff. And finally, 2 Calvert County deputy sheriffs, dedicated men and women the North Beach works with daily, have made the ultimate sacrifice. Deputy Sheriff Mark Claude Featherstone suffered fatal injuries in a motor vehicle collision, and Sheriff Oscar William Lusby in 1971 suffered fatal injuries in a motor vehicle collision. Dedicating the Fishing Creek Bridge to 6 members of the first responder community who have given their lives in service would not only be fitting tribute to their sacrifice, but would remind all that cross the bridge that the serving today are willing to keep the community safe, even at the greatest risk of their own well-being. Thank you, Senators.
Good afternoon, honorable senators. It's an honor to be here. I'm Chesapeake Beach Mayor Pat Mahoney, asking you all to support Senate Bill 140. A huge portion of our town population is retired or active military, first responders, or peace officers. We are a patriotic town. I like to describe Chesapeake Beach this way, and I hope you please visit us and see it for yourself. As you come down that road, you see the American Legion on the left, flags waving. Go straight ahead, and you'll see the beautiful vision of Veterans Park on the Chesapeake Bay, flags waving, home to World War II Honor Roll and Vietnam War Memorial. Take a left at that bay, and you'll see North Beach Volunteer Fire Department, home to 100 volunteer first responders. You take a right at the bay, and you enter the center of town, where we have boating, fishing, crab houses, a water park, a resort, and 3 gaming establishments. These attractions bring many hundreds of thousands of Marylanders every year who cross Fishing Creek Bridge to enjoy the amenities we have to offer. 94% of our visitors are from across the state of Maryland. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles also cross this bridge every day. But the men and women inside these vehicles are not there to enjoy the town amenities. Their job is to protect Marylanders, even if it puts their own lives at risk. Please join our effort to pay tribute to those heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice, and support Senate Bill 140. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, I see no questions for this panel or the sponsor, so thank you all very much for your testimony. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That
Members of the
concludes
committee.
the hearing on Senate Bill 140. Colleagues will now turn to Senate Bill 19. Senator Carter presenting Equity in Transportation Sector Guidelines and Analysis. Good afternoon, Senator. If you want to bring your panel forward, you can do that.
Madam Chair, yes, my panel would consist of Dr. Jordan, who is seated with the Transit Equity Coalition, Emily Ranson, Clean Water Action. If Joe Coronado or Bianca from JOTF are here, I would call them up. And Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be back here before you. I'd like to say that, we're relaxing this early in session, but I'm finding it's already fast-paced. And so I will try to be brief, and I hope this is not a heavy lift. This is a bill that passed both the House and the Senate last year. It was vetoed by the former governor, and it was not overridden. And so we are back again asking for your support. Transit equity is a civil rights issue of our time. Lack of access to public transit services in disadvantaged communities and communities of color is absolutely a civil rights issue. The communities have long been denied adequate access to Maryland's transit services. What this bill does is it seeks to eradicate that inequity by ensuring that public transit policies are devoid of adverse impacts on race, color, national origin, disability, age, gender, or income. The bill is long overdue, and it would apply the equal access protections afforded under Title VII to Maryland transportation. Senate Bill 19 would require the Maryland Department of Transportation to do, among other things, the following: perform a transit equity analysis prior to implementation of policies or changes of service. 2, compare and analyze multiple transportation services when conducting an equity analysis. It's important that the equity analysis be performed before a policy is implemented, because seemingly benign policies can adversely affect certain groups of people. For example, in September 2020, the Maryland Transit Administration, which is part of the Maryland Department of Transportation, proposed a permanent cut of 20% in the Baltimore region's core bus service, and a temporary cut of no more than 8% of MARC commuter train service. Approximately 83% of Baltimore region's bus ridership is Black or disadvantaged, while approximately 70% of the MARC train ridership is white. The 20% cut in bus service would have resulted in a permanent reduction in 12 major service lines, including the bus route 28, which transports 11% of Baltimore City Public School students. Had the cuts taken place, many Black and disadvantaged MTA riders would have been disproportionately deprived of needed transportation to get to work or school. Had the MTA been required to perform an equity analysis, there would not have been such a proposal. Senate Bill 19 will require the Maryland Department of Transportation to compare different transportation modes when conducting an equity analysis. When major reductions were proposed for core bus services in September 2020, there were no comparable reductions proposed for the Seaport, Airport, or the State Highway Administration. MDOT allocates 77% of its total budget to the State Highway Administration, but only 2% to the Maryland Transit Authority. This matters because the MTA serves the bulk of public transit patrons, most of whom are people of color and otherwise disadvantaged Maryland residents with no access to automobiles. Allocation of such a small portion of its budget to the MTA has a disparate impact on persons that rely solely on public transportation. Senate Bill 19 merits immediate passage to ensure Maryland's transit policies are thoroughly examined before potentially discriminatory impacts prior to implementation. A quick personal note, in Baltimore City, even where I live, there is, I would say, somewhat of a public transit desert. I live in what I would call, by most standards in Baltimore and throughout Maryland, what's considered to be a middle-class Baltimore neighborhood. And when my car is not in, and I'm thankful that oftentimes I can afford an Uber because there is no bus service that gets me from one point of Baltimore to another. There's no underground service that gets me from where I am in West Baltimore. I would have to catch no less than 3 buses or a combination of the a bus to a subway system to get downtown. So this is something that is a real issue where we are, and you've heard probably by many people in Baltimore for a long time about the cancellation of the Red Line and how devastated we are. Every single day, I see and applaud people on the bus stop waiting for transit at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning because they got to go out to a job in Hunt Valley and they got to take multiple modes of transportation. It's outrageous. And then something that really has driven this issue home for me recently is I represented a child that was in the juvenile justice system. And the child seemed to be a really good kid that had a lot of potential. He didn't have any prior instances, and then he was on probation, and all he was supposed to do was go to this mentor program, and he really liked it. So I was like, I can't understand. You like the program, all you have to do is go to the program, and you're not in trouble anymore. And he's like, I didn't have any way to get there. My mother didn't have a car. And I was like, that is absolutely outrageous that he couldn't get to the program. And so it's just important to note these are real issues that affect like just people's ability to navigate through the world. And so for that reason, I would love to have your support. I have expert panel of testimony, so I'm happy if you would consider, I'd take questions if I can, but I'd like you to hear from the panel.
Yeah, let's proceed with the panel, and then we'll see if there are any questions from the committee. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You all can proceed, just identify yourselves as you present.
All right, good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, I am Emily Ranson with Clean Water Action, here in support of Senate Bill 19. The Senate has passed this bill previously last year, and we are hugely thankful for everybody doing that. So I will keep it brief, refer to the sign-on testimony that we have submitted, where 42 organizations throughout the state have signed on in support of the bill. We appreciate the hard work the House and Senate did on the bill last year, and we hope to see it proceed again this year. So thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
Senator Griffith, Chair, and members of the Finance Committee, greetings. I'm Samuel Jordan, President of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. We urge you to report favorably on SB 19, the Equity in Transportation Sector Act of 2023. SB 19 promotes equity in transportation through anticipation and prevention as the better strategies when compared to penalty and correction, the principal strategies in the past. Title VI equivalent provisions are not enforced at the state level. SB 19 provides for such enforcement. SB 19 is distinguished by the requirement that changes in transportation policy must be justified before they can be implemented, not after implementation. The bill's provisions would have prevented cancellation of the Red Line project in 2015, the 15-month exposure of riders to derailment on the subway in 2018, and MTA's proposal of permanent racially disparate budget cuts in the core bus service in 2020. SB 19's anticipation and prevention strategies protect the public in public transportation. Due to the bill's mandatory prior due diligence, the cost of policy change implementation will be reduced. SB 19 is also cost-effective. SB 19 has major implications for climate change response and environmental protection. If, for example, MDOT-MTA put zero-emission buses in service on routes only serving mostly white passengers, SB 19 would reject such disparate distribution of the benefits of zero-emissions vehicles. Finally, we would alert the committee to the equity goals of this legislature, its leadership, and our new governor. With enactment of SB 19, Maryland will become the leader among the states of the nation in the enforcement of Title VI equivalent equity protections in public transportation. Senator Griffith and committee, we again urge you to report favorably on SB 19. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Chair, Vice Chair, and Committee for having my testimony. My name is Jose Coronado Flores. I'm a climate research and policy analyst with the organization CASA. CASA, being an organization that represents working class and immigrant communities, is invested in seeing this bill pass because we see the negative effects that poor transportation project planning has on our community, especially in regards to racial and environmental equity. Many of our members live in communities that are overburdened with transportation air pollution. Take Langley Park, for example, a place I've called home and where many of our members reside. The intersection at Tacoma-Langley Crossroads sees an immense amount of cars, buses, and construction vehicles every day. The high quantity of air pollution there is hurting us. Growing up, I thought it was normal to smell exhaust everywhere I went, and only until moving to Frederick did I really smell fresh air in my own community. A study from the American Public Transportation Association indicates that per passenger mile traveled, public transit produces only 5% as much carbon monoxide as car use. Maryland can go further with a transit system designed with zero-emission, high-capacity modes of travel in higher-density communities. Yes, our current reality now is that cars help many of us get to where we need to be, but the most congested routes should not be where low-income people of color live. With smarter and more environmentally conscious planning, low-income and communities of color won't get burdened with more 6-lane roads running in every direction like what is happening in Langley Park. Thank you. That is my testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klausmeier, and members of the Finance Committee. And thank you so much to Senator Carter for introducing this very critical bill. My name is Ioana Stoica, and I'm a policy advocate with the Job Opportunities Task Force, a nonprofit organization that works on policies that remove barriers to employment. Now, in addition to advancing legislation, we also run a workforce development program that trains primarily formerly incarcerated individuals in the trades, including plumbing, carpentry, and electrical. Virtually all of our participants rely on public transportation, which is extremely unreliable in Baltimore City, as you have already heard. At our last round of interviews in December, I was speaking with a young man who was telling me that he walked for over an hour to get to the interview location because the bus system in the city has continually eroded over the past few years to the point where residents are saying that the only thing that they can count on consistently are cancellations and delays. Part of the problem has been a redirection of funds from public transportation projects in places like Baltimore City to highway expansion serving predominantly white or high-income neighborhoods. One example of this that you've already heard about today is the Red Line project, which would have significantly expanded access to employment and spurred economic development in the city. But instead, our residents were left behind to fend for themselves in getting to work, to the doctor, or to the grocery store in places that are already food deserts. On an important related note, low-income residents are also much more likely to work in the evening and over the night shift, so transportation is even more of an issue during this time. Mobility is key to our economy, and when inequitable decisions are made, our low-income residents and our residents of color are disproportionately impacted, which is why we urge a favorable report on SB 19. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for your testimony. I don't see any questions from the committee, so Senator, thank you and your panel for your time and your testimony on Senate Bill 19. Have a great afternoon. We're going to.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, if I may, I apologize. I have one more quick thing that I want to mention, which is that it was brought to my attention by the House sponsor that the Maryland Disability Rights Coalition may have a proposed amendment. I have talked to her, and if that is something that comes before you, we're happy with that if it happens.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
All right, we have Joanne Lyons-Wooten and Bridge Dumais. If you're here, you can come forward. Good afternoon, and following this panel, we'll have two virtual witnesses. So, good afternoon. You can proceed in any order, just introduce yourself.
Would you like to go first, Ms. Joanne? Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Joanne Lyons-Wooten, a Baltimore City resident, representing the Maryland Poor People's Campaign. Our group has one goal: ending poverty in our state. We enthusiastically encourage swift passage of SB 19. Here's why. Transportation policies have historically entrenched disparities that have impacted people of color and low-wage communities for generations and have been a major barrier to lifting up poor Marylanders. Professor Deborah Archer of the NYU School of Law writes, quote, "Our transportation system has always been a driver of racial inequality. The benefits and burdens of our transportation system have been planned, developed, and sustained to pull resources from Black communities," close quote. In Maryland, two well-known disastrous transportation projects are the infamous Highway to Nowhere, constructed in 1964, and the cancellation of the Red Line light rail system, ordered by then-Governor Hogan in 2015. Full construction of the Highway to Nowhere was canceled, but not before it devastated 8 vibrant, majority-Black neighborhoods in West Baltimore, displacing 1,500 residents, destroying 971 homes, and demolishing 62 businesses. Mayor Scott calls the highway, quote, "the poster child for inequality and systemic racism in our country. The racial and economic disparities that persist in Baltimore are clear," close quote. An NAACP Legal Defense Fund study found the cancellation of the Red Line had a disproportionately negative impact on Blacks and other minorities, other racial minorities while benefiting white residents. The equity assessments required by SB 19 would have prevented the enduring damage caused by the construction of the Highway to Nowhere and the cancellation of the Red Line. SB 19 is an important step toward redressing historical inequities and implementing transformative policies. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Finance Committee. My name is Bridge Dumais. I'm the political coordinator with 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. We are the largest healthcare workers union in the nation, and we represent over 10,000 members in the Maryland, D.C. region. We proudly support this bill and ask you to issue a favorable report. Public transportation should be both affordable and equitable, as well as environmentally friendly, and this bill is absolutely critical to achieving those goals. 1199 SEIU members provide health care to our loved ones and save lives on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic every single day. Unfortunately, many healthcare workers are often negatively impacted by unreliable public transportation. Healthcare workers do not have grace periods for tardiness, which can lead to them being disciplined if they are only 1 minute late to work. There's a critical short staffing crisis across the healthcare industry in Maryland. We cannot afford to lose good healthcare workers from their jobs simply because they can't get to work on time because the bus won't get them there. Additionally, Maryland has the longest hospital wait times in the country, making it even more important that hospital workers have transportation that they can rely on. It is essential that caring for a patient is not stalled due to a worker having unreliable transportation. The state must make it a priority for healthcare workers, other low-income essential workers, and any transit rider to utilize dependable and affordable public transportation. Furthermore, as healthcare workers, our members are very concerned about the rise in preventable illnesses because of dirty traffic pollution like asthma. When folks are struggling with preventable illnesses, and they are more likely to end up in the hospital, which then, again, creates a really terrible worker-to-patient ratio. So we need to make sure folks are not being exposed to toxic chemicals who are making them sick, both for their own health and so they don't end up hospitalized. We urge the committee to vote favorably. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no questions from the committee, so thank you so much for your testimony. Committee, we have 2 virtual witnesses. We'll start with Megan Latshaw, signed up in favor of the bill. You can proceed. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chair and committee members. I'm here to speak in support of SB 0023. I'm Dr. Megan Latshaw. I live in Baltimore City in District 43. On faculty at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering. And the opinions expressed herein are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Hopkins. Public transit provides relatively low-cost access to jobs, education, food, and healthcare. Access to all of these contributes to the economy of Maryland. And through this access, Marylanders tend to be healthier and then more productive, both personally and professionally, including requiring less time off from work. Public transit also reduces pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, which you just heard, by taking cars off the road. It's linked with increased physical activity, and increasing physical activity and reducing pollution directly impacts cardiovascular and respiratory health. Cardiovascular health should be a priority for our state since heart disease continues to be the leading cause of death in Maryland, accounting for almost 25% of all deaths. And we rank 20th in the nation for deaths from cardiovascular disease. So we can do better. Despite all these health benefits, public transit in Baltimore and likely other parts of the state often fails to get people to their destinations in a reasonable amount of time, just like the previous speaker said. This is especially concerning since low-income people of color represent the majority of transit users in Baltimore, many of whom during the COVID-19 pandemic were classified as essential workers. And rural areas might have similar issues, but we haven't really studied that yet in Maryland. But given the past racist policies in the state that include segregation and redlining, we need to be sure that we're not continuing to disproportionately impact poor or Black and brown communities. All transit policies need to be assessed before adoption This bill presents an opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I see no questions from the committee, so we thank you for your testimony. Have a good afternoon. And that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 19. Colleagues will now turn to Senate Bill 108, Senator Augustine, Health Insurance Annual Behavioral Health Wellness Visits, Coverage and Reimbursement. Senator Augustine has a panel, so we'll bring Megan Chilton, Jocelyn Rout, and we have virtually on your panel Mary Beth DiMartino. So good afternoon again, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Senator Malcolm Augustine here, Senate Bill 108, coverage of an annual behavioral health well visit. Colleagues, a recently released report by the National Alliance for Mental Illness, better known as NAMI, shared that 781,000 adults in Maryland have a mental health condition, and 57,000 Marylanders aged 12 to 17 have depression. It also indicated that 250,000 adults in Maryland did not receive mental health care, with 33% of those folks not getting it because of cost. And Marylanders have a 10 times greater likelihood of being forced out of network for mental health care. For those of you who are new to the committee, this is going to be an issue that you'll hear from me over and over again. Those of you who have been here, you have heard this before, that is the case, compared with their primary care. Due to higher out-of-pocket costs, Marylanders are left with less affordable and more challenging measures to access adequate care. Colleagues, our behavioral health crisis is complex, needs many hands and tools to deal with it. I will be before you on other pieces of legislation that deal with individual pieces of the puzzle, in addition to a piece of legislation that seeks to take a more comprehensive look. Yesterday, you heard from me about the benefits of collaborative care model and supporting its implementation for our public insurance recipients. Today, I'm here around the private insurance, which I think you heard about yesterday some of the challenges, and I think it still applies because you heard about some of the challenges yesterday from the primary care physicians on the ability to provide that behavioral health care, which it really does illustrate we still have a need for even more tools to address this unreal crisis that we have. So the collaborative care model helps, of course, it's very important, but we do need more than just one tool. And so today, this is about a tool that places our mental health on equal footing with our behavioral health and commercial insurance at the point of prevention and initial care. Now, how does Senate Bill 108 do that? It requires entities including health insurers, nonprofit health service plans, and health maintenance organizations to provide reimbursement and coverage for annual behavioral health wellness visits. What that means is that they must reimburse for annual behavioral health wellness visits that should replicate the structure of an annual wellness visit for somatic care, or what we would call like your annual physical, where you go in, you get your annual physical, to have that deals with our physical side of our care, an annual visit that deals with our behavioral health side of our care. What this also does in this bill is provides a definition for what that behavioral health well visit will be. And just so that you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're already, the public sector of this already has this from the ACA. So really, this is really talking about this private insurance side of it. Now, we know we have an alarming number of mental health and mental health care issues in our state. And this is one of those places that will help to cover it. We also know that what this piece of legislation will do, and I'm hopeful that it will do, is it will help to reduce the stigma associated with receiving behavioral health services by normalizing behavior, reduces the stigma around it altogether. So if we have this annual behavioral health well visit, in the same way that we have it for primary care, the same way that we have for gynecological care, hopefully it will shift the culture around receiving this type of care. And so that it destigmatizes it by offering it in a way that where people feel far more comfortable receiving that care. Now, I want to share with you all where I got this piece of legislation from. I was at a community behavioral health benefit hosted by Bladensburg, Councilmember Jocelyn Rout, who is here as a part of this panel today. She's just been a tremendous champion in our community for mental health and mental illness and making sure that people know that they got to take care of themselves and take care of each other and take care of their loved ones. At this event, there was a provider. Her name is Shatia Blunt. And Shatia is a licensed independent clinical social worker or a licensed clinical social worker. So she's a licensed person who works in this space. And she talked with me, you know, I'm there as a member of the community, trying to always be there for our folks. And she and I got to talking about the stigma associated with behavioral health and trying to break down those barriers associated with the care. And it was great because she came to the people, right? She had decided she was going to come right to the people because she really emphasized self-care and prevention, which is kind of at the heart of what this well visit is about. So, and it really touched me too. Because to me, I'm like, listen, let's help people before they have themselves into some tough situations so that we don't end up getting into situations that get far worse, where we have these down, situations where people get involved with law enforcement. Wow, if we could have helped them earlier on, then maybe we wouldn't have to have those kinds of things, okay? And we can do that. And so that's really what this piece of legislation really tries to do. And then so she and I kept talking about it. It was all good, and she was sharing, she was telling people these things and everything else. And so then I asked her, she talked about the fact that she doesn't take insurance. And the reason that she didn't take insurance was because she was into prevention. She was into wellness, and there was not a code that was being reimbursed by the carriers for that service, okay? And so that, to me, was like, okay. I said, but then she said there was some good news. What she said, though, is that, Malcolm, although that is the case here in Maryland, the state of Colorado passed legislation in 2021 that did create a well visit, okay? And that was created in 2021, and it went into effect for large group employers in 2022 and small group employers in 2023. And that's why this bill was born. That's literally how this bill was born. Because I feel like we should be able to bring a similar piece of policy here to our state. Now, since that happened, Delaware has also signed this into effect for the 124. And Massachusetts also recently passed legislation similar to it. Okay, and so we can lead on this, Maryland, but we aren't out front. There are others who have done this, and there have been some issues, some concerns with the costs associated with it. Thus far, those things have not necessarily borne themselves out in Colorado, and so I think that that's something that's very important. Now, there is a couple of pieces of letters of information that you will find inside of that express some concerns, okay? And so one of those concerns that was expressed had to do with not clearly defined additional behavioral health care services will be covered by the insurance, and also recommendations for additional services. There was also one that was in there that talked about it being unclear on how the annual behavioral health visit will be conducted and by whom, and how it complements the current screening requirements. So I listened to that, some of that I had heard. And what you'll find in your packets, colleagues, is an amendment, a sponsor amendment that was already in there that looks to provide a clearer definition of what the services that would be provided to deal with some of these questions and concerns, and then also a clearer definition on who would be able to provide it, okay? And so that would be the licensed, certified, or otherwise authorized under the health occupation article to practice this within this scope of practice, okay? So we've tried to deal with those two matters in order to make sure that we are covering the bases of the concerns that have been put before us with this piece of legislation. And so, colleagues, with the sponsor's amendment that I have, I would ask for a favorable report on this bill, Senate Bill 108, which looks to really help us destigmatize behavioral health care, mental health, mental illness, by providing a well visit that is just like we have the well visit for our primary care doctors, our physical, and just to make it as normalized as that can be. And so I ask for a favorable report, and happy to answer any questions, and of course hear from my two panelists.
Okay, we can proceed with the panel.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Councilmember Jocelyn Rout from the town of Bladensburg. It's a pleasure to be before the committee today. I am here today in full support of SB 0108, which is a very important piece of legislation for all Marylanders. As Senator Augustine shared, I have hosted a mental health awareness day, which has connected Marylanders to services and supports to improve their mental health and emotional well-being for the last 2 years. I also am an individual with lived experience in the behavioral health system of care. I serve as a mental health advocate, promoting wellness and recovery as a social worker. I graduated with my master's degree from Howard University in the spring of 2009. I now serve as a public health advisor for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, where my role is to oversee the Mental Health Awareness Training Grant Program as a government project officer. I also come to you as a mother of 5. 3 of my 5 children have a diagnosis of a mental health condition. Well, why does all of that matter? I'm here today because recovery is needed and possible for all Marylanders, but it's going to take your strong support with Bill 0108. Recovery has been identified as a primary goal for behavioral health care. In August in 2010, leaders at SAMHSA and in the community met to explore a working definition of recovery. Recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Sometimes people need preventative wellness activities to boost their ability to maintain their mental health. Individuals who suffer from mental health diagnoses may use many different tools to assist them and live their full lives. Recovery pathways are needed, and it needs to be covered by insurance. Please, please, please support Senate Bill 0108. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here today to present to you SB 108. My name is Megan Chilton, and I'm a master's student at Johns Hopkins studying health policy and interning with Senator Malcolm Augustine's office. As a student in the birthplace of public health research, I'm constantly reminded of advancements by scholars that stood before me and the continual growth of the healthcare system. Mental health care, in my opinion, however, continues to exist as a shadow amidst our healthcare system, which points to my interest in a bill contending for mental health care to be equal to somatic health care. I first want to provide a landscape of mental health in Maryland. According to the National Alliance for Mental Illness, as of February 2021, 39.1% of Maryland adults reported anxiety or depression symptoms, and 31.3% were not able to obtain needed therapy or counseling. And according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, for Marylanders enrolled in large employer health plans, the average out-of-pocket spending for services with mental illnesses is higher when compared to enrollees without mental illnesses, specifically $1,346 compared to $638. These larger out-of-pocket costs leave Marylanders with less affordable care and is a representation of the inequitable system. SB 108 aims to dismantle these cost barriers through requiring entities to provide reimbursements and coverage for annual behavioral health wellness visits. This bill would also require the reimbursement for behavioral health wellness visits to duplicate those of somatic health visits. The existing mental health care system is characterized by potential harms such as cost barriers, stigma, and illness identity following a required diagnosis.
The long-term goal is to decrease hospitalization, and through SB 108, these collections of harms are acknowledged and the long-term goal could potentially be achieved. Other states, including Colorado, as Senator mentioned, have implemented policies requiring health plans to cover annual mental health wellness exams, and ensured coverage is parallel to coverage of a physical examination and complies with mental health parity laws. The Legislative Committee of Colorado even recognized mental health being of equal importance and moved it from Tier 2 to Tier 1. With the demonstrated prevalence of mental health concerns in Maryland, I ask that you take the time and consideration of SB 108. SB 108 provides an opportunity to accompany Colorado's legislation in upholding the behavioral health care needs in Maryland. I respectfully request a favorable report.
Thank you. We have one more member of the sponsor panel. Ms. DiMartino is on. We'll take your testimony, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. My name is Mary Beth DiMartino. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Social Workers Maryland chapter, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Thank you for the opportunity to present today on Senate Bill 108. I just want to say and echo what our colleagues have said, that this identifies mental health needs earlier. It gets people access to services earlier, which is something all of us can agree is in the best interest of Marylanders. We agree that there would be a cost savings of getting people who are untreated and not getting into the system, getting them identified earlier and access to Maryland services sooner. We do agree that there is a huge mental health crisis in Maryland right now. We know that needs are huge right now among Marylanders, not only among the general population, but among those working professionals, people who don't want to be identified with a diagnosis, and being able to see them and treat them without the stigma of a diagnosis is going to create much more access to care. It's going to eliminate the barriers to care. We understand that there are some limitations in this bill, and we do support with amendments that we need to define what wellness assessment is and to flesh that out a little bit more. But we agree that this bill, eliminating the barriers to treatment, making it easier for practitioner and patient to communicate and agree on treatment planning, is in the best interest of Marylanders, and we fully support this. And we believe that eliminating the barriers, the stigma, and the access to care for Marylanders is in the best interest of all Marylanders. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to go to Senator Reedy and then Senator Guile.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just a question, Senator Augustine, to you, I think, as the sponsor, and thank you all for your testimony. Obviously, I agree it would be great if we could do this or something like this. Question, in Colorado, how do they deal with the access issue? Because it's interesting, because Colorado is not at all comparable in some ways to us, but they have these large rural expanses and wide open spaces. And then they've got a very dense urban area in Denver and Colorado Springs. So here we have a lot more density, but we still have some far-flung areas. So how do they deal with the access issue, first of all? And then I maybe have a follow-up, if it's okay.
Senator, thank you for the question. I don't know the answer to that. But the thing is, though, that the bill doesn't necessarily speak to network adequacy, which is the question that you're asking, which we know is a real issue and a real concern. The way that this bill, though, actually supports network adequacy, in my opinion, is that if there is a reimbursement code that's available, it makes it such that providers are going to be more likely to be in those places. It makes it more a situation there where they're able to provide services, get reimbursed. It will enhance the panel of the folks that are there. But this,
Absolutely.
this bill does
And
not.
telehealth has done that, I think, with the pandemic. It's
I'm
done
sorry,
that tremendously.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah.
Martino, I apologize, but in the committee, we don't, Madam Chair decides who gets an opportunity to
Feel free to
speak.
send us an email, though. for sure.
Absolutely, okay, thank you. So yeah, Senator, that would be my answer to that with regard to the access issue, though.
So what we're trying to do is basically ensure that insurance covers almost like they cover one primary care visit for each of us.
That's exactly right.
And it would be done, it had to be, and then there's another question in here. MedCai had the questions about, couple of questions about diagnosis and who would be able to do these kinds of services.
Yes.
And I guess there's some other commentary from a couple of other testimonies.
Right,
So
and that's where I mentioned, Senator, that.
you've got an amendment.
I put the amendment,
That's fine.
it should be in your packet, that more clearly, we acknowledge that, more clearly defines what the visit would be, and I'm still open, by the way, to further conversations around that, but more clearly defines what that would be, and then also more clearly defines who would be that licensed individual that would be able to provide the service. The bill that the Colorado bill is, it's not as specific about that, but I'm more than happy to adjust.
Yeah, I mean, there's arguments actually to try to make it, maybe not tighten it so much, but I think we do want to be sure we're getting the outcome that's desired by the bill. So, no, that's great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is also, I think, for the bill sponsor, for Senator Augustine. Just so I understand this, and this kind of follows up with Senator Reedy's questions about access. So this is, it's contemplated that this annual behavioral wellness visit, would that be conducted by a mental health provider, or would that be by your primary care?
Yeah, this specific piece of legislation, it would be by a mental health provider. That, again, is in the,
Right.
that's actually that's not entirely true. Let me re-center that one. The visit would be specific to a well visit for mental health. However, the amendment suggests that it be a behavioral health professional or one who is within that scope of practice.
Okay.
So if there were a provider that had within the scope of practice to provide these services, they would be able to utilize the CPT code, the payment code in order to get reimbursed for the service.
And I appreciated your discussion yesterday on the collaborative care model. I think it certainly makes it less of a barrier for an individual to receive care, kind of a one-stop shop, for lack of a better phrase for that.
Right.
What I'm wondering also along that same lines is I've heard from a lot of people, especially parents in the aftermath of COVID, trying to get behavioral health services or mental health care services for children and finding long waiting lists, and it goes to the same access of care. And also they find that the mental health provider needs to establish care with that particular patient. Are you finding, let's say that this is somebody that's just receiving a once-a-year behavioral wellness check and may not necessarily be having continuous care, if you understand what I'm saying, that mental health providers are willing to provide this annual visit, or that they already have established patients that they are seeing? Does that make sense?
It does. I understand
Yeah,
exactly what you're saying. So the way that the bill is contemplated is that within the visit, and similar to when you go and visit your primary care, they would go through and, in essence, would be looking to identify if there were a concern that required follow-on care. They would then be able to create that treatment plan and work towards that. That's in the amendment to the bill, that it would do just that. That is, so, but I'm going to go back to what I said before, which is that right now, there isn't a code, it's my understanding, it is my understanding, there's not that code where they're able right now to bill for this well visit for this, which actually limits their ability to actually uncover some of the concerns or things that are out there. And it's also like, it contributes obviously to us, not getting a sense of things until maybe they get much further along. So that's kind of what the bill is about. if you identify, issues and concerns that you have to work on, anxiety and other disorders that you could then get control over earlier, then hopefully you don't progress into more acute mental illness down the line.
Leading to a treatment plan long-term.
That is
If somebody
correct,
is just-
if necessary.
Okay.
The same way it works with your primary care physician. So right now, you go into your primary care physician, and we want that to be that collaborative care, as you well know. I'm very much in support of that. It comes into it after there's been that initial screening that there is a connection to another behavioral health specialist, right? But let's say a person hasn't, they now go instead, we still want them to be able to do that, but now they're able to go for a behavioral health well visit as well. And so to me, it's additive, and not that it takes away from what we would be able to do in the space with the primary care physician.
Okay. That makes sense. Just as a general observation, I feel that a lot of those barriers include having to get a referral, then go find somebody who has availability for care, and there's just these frustrations with parents needing to get help for kids especially.
Senator,
Yeah.
I'll be back.
Well, you know that.
Yes. You'll see
And
me
I
again.
appreciate
so
you.
Those are areas and barriers that I'm with you 100% on. That's why I started out by saying that we have a comprehensive issue and concern. This is only one where we do have a lot of different areas, including network adequacy and access.
Right.
The barriers, breaking down the barriers to gaining access to care, which we also will work on too.
Yeah, well, thank you for your work on this. I
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a remark.
Sorry about that. We're just going to have responses to committee members' questions. So I actually don't see any additional questions from the committee, but certainly invite you to communicate with the committee in writing or through the senator if you have additional comments moving forward. We do have additional witnesses signed up on this bill. We have two present, Matthew Celentano and Tricia Swanson. And then following that, we have some virtual witnesses on this bill also. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You can proceed.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tricia Swanson, and I am the Acting Director of Government Affairs for Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield. Here today in support of all of the goals that the Senator talked about when he talked about kind of the goals of SB 108. And we really do appreciate Senator Augustine's ongoing commitment to tackling behavioral health issues in our state. Care First believes rather than having two separate visits, one where it's a physical annual exam and one for a behavioral health exam, that primary care doctors and pediatricians should be the first stop to do these initial screenings and then refer as needed to a behavioral health specialist. And this makes sense because as we look at the way that this is our behavioral health is moving forward, it's really treating the whole person. And we think by fragmenting these two, it goes against kind of the culture of wanting to treat the whole person in step with one another. Currently in the state, we are having those initial screenings happening, but it's not happening on a broad enough scale. We'd like to explore whether or not we should look at having PCPs and pediatricians incorporate an initial behavioral wellness screening into the annual visit. We're doing this. We encourage all of our providers to incorporate this checklist, and I have an example of the checklist I'm happy to share with the committee if there's an interest. Additionally, we've talked a little bit about collaborative care. As many of you know, this is when a PCP and a pediatrician does that initial screening and recognizes that a patient has additional needs. We've actually seen an uptick in these services they've more than tripled over the last 3 years. So this is working and we just need to enhance this more. To close out with a metaphor, heart health is a critical issue in our state. However, we don't ask that every Marylander go to a cardiologist every year to get a comprehensive assessment. We're not doing that because that screening isn't necessary for every person, and it would negatively impact access to cardiologists. Similarly, we don't want that to happen to behavioral health specialists, and we look forward to working with the sponsor on this legislation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Finance Committee. My name is Matt Celentano, here today on behalf of the League of Life and Health Insurers of Maryland, favorable with amendments on Senate Bill 108. Like Tricia said to my left, conceptually, we're very much supportive of this bill. We just need to sort of hammer down to the details, including what the sponsor had said about the broad language. We are not exactly sure what a behavioral health wellness visit should be defined as, and we would like to work on getting to a place where it's closer and better well-defined. League members believe that the best thing to do is to incorporate a behavioral health checklist to your annual primary care visit. Like Tricia said, we think it would start to get in one of the ways to get rid of the stigma of a behavioral health sort of issue if it's incorporated into your primary care visit. The American Psychological Association has a wellness check that your primary care physician can do in less than 5 minutes. We believe that there's a red flag at that point, you should be referred to behavioral health services. This is one approach we are thinking about. Another approach we think is this could be potentially a large mandate on health insurance, and we would love to have the Maryland Healthcare Commission give all of you options to analyze what the cost would be. I hate to always come back to cost, but it's one thing that we have to kind of keep in mind. We're looking at about 1.2, 1.3 people that are in the group health market in Maryland, in large group, small group, and individual market. That's what you guys have jurisdiction over. If every one of those 1.3 million folks got a behavioral health visit at roughly, let's say, $150 a visit, we're looking at about a $200 million cost. That is a lot. It says in the fiscal note that you should anticipate a cost to a fully insured insurance. It's not the most important thing in this whole discussion of holistic behavioral health approaches, but it is a factor. And that's why I think it would be important to have the MHCC give you some more information before you make a decision on such a critical piece of legislation. Like I said, we are favorable with the amendment. We would be happy to work with the sponsor in this committee to get to a place where we can all be supportive. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For both of you, but Matt, I know we've talked about this on a couple of other subjects. Can you just reiterate, so how much of the overall market is the group market that we have control of? What's the percentage of?
About 18% of the insured lives in Maryland.
So this bill was not going to, I always have to be reminded, bills like this don't impact, any sort of like government plans or.
It would not include the state health program for state employees. It would not include Medicare, Medicaid, or self-insured plans, which is the largest piece of that pie of the 100% of insured lives.
Okay, but those plans often have this kind of coverage already?
Sure. Well,
generally?
I mean, sometimes when you're a self-insured plan, you negotiate the benefit design for whatever particular needs you need for your company. So I can't say for sure, and it's sort of a contract that's developed between the carrier and what you're trying to insure if you're self-insured.
Okay, and the number you just threw out, I bet if everybody does one visit a year, it's $200 million, hypothetical.
Roughly. I mean, that's back of the
$200 million.
envelope math. It depends on what the contract is between the carrier and the physician on what their reimbursement level is. I just picked a sort of standard in the middle of number, but it's expensive.
This bill is not saying, though, that you can't charge for it in the premiums. It's just saying you have to cover it, correct?
Well, I think in the bill, it says that it would be at the same level as a primary care visit. And in Maryland, a primary care visit has no cost share. And that's great. And we want to encourage people to go to their primary care visit every year because we're going to catch things earlier so you don't get as sicker later and it costs more later. That's why we think it would be super important to kind of incorporate a behavioral health wellness check with the intent of the bill in your primary care visit. Ask a bunch of questions. I know, for example, when I go to my annual checkup, they ask me a bunch of questions that are obviously about behavioral health. They ask me how much I'm drinking. Am I feeling blue? Actually, they asked me last time, do I have guns in the house? Those are the kinds of questions that I'm asked at my annual visit. But if we had a standardized checklist that doctors are asking every single time, we'd be able to have interventions earlier, refer you to doctors that would be appropriate for your behavioral health condition. Now, that being said, like Delegate Guile said before, we have tremendous shortages in the behavioral health space. Right?
She's with us in the state
right?
Senate.
So yes, I have three kids. I have 3 kids myself, 2 of which could use behavioral health services. It is almost impossible to find a child psychologist that will see your kids. There are only 6 child psychologists on the entire Eastern Shore. If we don't develop a better workforce to see all these behavioral health patients, we're going to have bigger problems. And one of the things I'm concerned with this bill is that if everybody in that 1.3 million of the group plan folks are going to see behavioral health services, we don't have the workforce to see them.
So it won't cost 200, no, I understand. This is an interesting conversation, we should continue.
Yeah.
I won't belabor the point.
This is an important conversation, but it's
So cost,
nuanced.
and cost is an important factor. I'm
It's
glad
just
you're
one
saying
factor.
it's not the most important factor, but we do have to figure,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mounts.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the testimony also.
Yeah.
So was your testimony that there's not opposition to the bill?
We are not opposed to the concept of this at all. We just want to make sure that it can be done within sort of the framework and with existing resources that are available, we should be utilizing.
But there was a cost, there's discussion about the cost.
Yeah, if you were to add an additional behavioral health wellness visit on top of your primary care visit that would be at no cost share, we're talking about roughly $200 million or so. Now, I'm not an actuary, so I can't give you an exact number, but that's why I would love the Maryland Healthcare Commission to opine and give you a menu of options.
Right, because we're going to have to vote, we'll probably have to vote on it, though, before the commission.
Well, I can tell you, I'm not saying this is what you should do. I'm just saying, in the past, within the health committees, if there is a question about the cost impact traditionally on mandates, and this bill could probably be considered a mandate, you could send it to the Maryland Healthcare Commission with just a chair's letter to give you all the options that would be possible for you with actuarial numbers on what it would cost in the future, and then you could make a better informed decision. I'm not sure if there has been MHCC input on this bill as of yet, but we could certainly do that.
Yeah, and where would you get the criteria for a wellness check?
Well, there are a lot of professional organizations that already have them. I just pulled one off the American Psychological Association's website, but there, I think, is plenty of research in this space, and folks that are in the specialty would probably be able to give you a better checklist than I can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I understand what you're for and against, it sounds to me that you're okay with an annual behavior wellness so long as that's part of the existing annual physical that's conducted by the primary care physician. Is that correct?
I would phrase it as that we're supportive of your pediatrician or your PCP doing that kind of initial screening, and then if they see a need for more, then they would make that referral to a behavioral health specialist. But it wouldn't be like an annual covered going to a behavioral health specialist that you pick.
How is that any different than what we have right now?
It's, right now, PCPs and pediatricians aren't, many of them are not doing this initial kind of checklist and check-in. So we believe that should be more encouraged,
And how can we legislate that to encourage primary care providers to?
You could require providers to do that as a part of their primary care visit.
Okay, so as far as what the bill has right now as having this separate code for a behavioral wellness check, you're opposed to that. Is that what I'm understanding?
I don't think that's necessarily true from my case,
Okay.
Senator. I just don't, I haven't seen the details, and I don't know, I don't want to speak to CPT codes that I don't know about.
I don't want to speak to CPT codes anytime. To be honest.
The CPT codes are developed by the AMA, and we
Yes.
can get you information for it, but I can't speak to that right now off the top of my head. There's
Okay.
thousands of them.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions from the committee for this panel, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. We're going to turn to some virtual witnesses. I have Ann Seacott, Jordan Bryant, and Ebony Montgomery on deck. Good afternoon. Oh, can you unmute for me?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My apologies. I'm Ann Seacott with Policy Partners representing the Maryland chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence in strong support of Senate Bill 108. Our reimbursement for behavioral health wellness visits will create greater equity between somatic care and behavioral health care. And those of you who are returning to this committee know we've talked a lot over the years about parity. Comprehensive assessments are conducted by trained behavioral health clinicians authorized by Maryland law to determine if we have a diagnosable mental health or substance use disorder. When we get an annual physical exam, our primary care provider gets reimbursed whether we get a clean bill of health or not. But with behavioral health, if the clinician does not find a diagnosable disorder, they cannot bill insurance, and that's the point of this bill. The fiscal note on the bill, as you may have seen, lists all the mandated screenings that we've been talking about that are covered under the Affordable Care Act. A screening is not the same as a comprehensive assessment. We've all had those screenings, as you've heard one of the witnesses already talk about, when our physician asks us how much we drink or are we feeling depressed. Those are important tools in identifying potential problems and referring to another provider for a full assessment. What I've heard from clinicians is that some of the people they see are deterred from seeking help early on when maybe they're experiencing some mild symptoms because they're afraid of what a diagnosis would bring. We could potentially avoid more extensive and expensive care down the road if we enabled providers to be able to bill for a visit when perhaps we're not at a point of a diagnosis. I also object to the thought that we shouldn't identify people's needs because there's a workforce shortage. And that's why this committee, this General Assembly, has been working so hard on identifying ways to address the workforce shortage. We know the benefits to health outcomes are greater when we provide earlier intervention. And with the sponsors amendment, we believe this is a very good bill.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions from the committee, so have a good afternoon. Thanks for your testimony. All right, we have, is that Jordan Bryant? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Jordan Bryant, and I am a resident of Prince George's County. I come to you today speaking highly in favor of SB 108. My reasons are threefold. Firstly, SB 108 is a crucial step in a much-needed expansion of access to mental health care. I myself spent over a year searching for the therapist with whom I now work. I refused to pay out of pocket for a service that was covered by insurance, but the best-rated practitioners generally did not accept it. This was a phenomenon in which I raged, thinking it due to greed. But I have come to understand that the most common reasons behind such refusal are ethical fidelity and patient protection, as insurers require that a mental illness be diagnosed in order for insurance to be used for mental health. There are no preventative or checkup billing codes at therapists' disposal. Much as we pay lip service to the need to provide mental health services as widely as possible, the most accessible way financially for many people to receive it, via insurance, is actually the hardest road. Things need to change immediately. Secondly, the bill is a promising start toward the placement of mental health on par with somatic health. It is beyond dispute in our modern age that mental wellness is just as important as physical wellness, and indeed a direct prerequisite for overall well-being. Therefore, it follows that if we societally value somatic health enough for insurance to cover an annual primary care checkup, then it must also cover an annual mental care checkup. Lastly, SB 108 opens the doors to relaxation of legalized stigma surrounding mental health care. I am a Black female attorney and a proud gun owner. The current state of play, in which any insurance-based appointment with a mental health professional ultimately leads to a diagnosis of mental illness, inevitably means that high-performing professionals are not going to seek the help they need, as licensure requirements often include highly consequential questions about mental illness. What is more, a Black woman in the United States where my personal safety is constantly threatened on both the racial and gender fronts, the possibility of interference with my Second Amendment right by virtue of a routine healthcare visit turned mental illness diagnosis has a profound chilling effect and leads to an impossible choice between legal self-preservation and maintenance of mental hygiene. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see any questions from the committee, so have a great afternoon. We're going to move to Ebony Montgomery. Good afternoon.
Senators, my name is Ebony Montgomery. I'm a health equity subject matter expert with Urban Health 360
in support of SB 108 and any amendments made by sponsor of the bill. Historically, behavioral health services have lagged behind somatic health care in terms of parity. Even with the passage of the Affordable Care Act and the ensuing emphasis on prevention as a cost-saving and life-saving approach to health, coverage for behavioral health preventative services continues to lag behind. SB 108 would eliminate a barrier to access to preventative behavioral health care for all individuals regardless of cost, thereby creating an equitable environment for even the most vulnerable Marylanders. SB 108 would also fill a gap in healthcare access that primary care providers have been tasked with filling, despite the fact that this stopgap measure undervalues the precision that is required to sufficiently identify and diagnose a range of behavioral health conditions. Because primary care physicians are not necessarily equipped with the skill set to accurately identify the nuances that characterize certain behavioral health conditions, some patients may go on to experience more severe behavioral health symptoms because their condition was either misdiagnosed or missed altogether. If patients are asked to utilize a categorically unqualified professional for prevention screenings and do not have access to a complete evaluation by a behavioral health care professional, then patients are not being offered the care they need. Consequently, the issue of parity then becomes an issue of equity and inequity, as this is an avoidable, unjustified, and unjust inequality in coverage. Incorporating behavioral health into the larger preventative framework where an annual behavioral health wellness visit and annual well checks go hand in hand is an equitable option, allowing for both behavioral health treatment and prevention in parity with somatic health care. And this patient-centered approach serves to further normalize behavioral health and wellness across the lifespan. Lastly, when considering social determinants of mental health, we all have people in our social support environment who we rely on for advice and emotional support. How beneficial would it be if one of those persons for whom we seek comfort and support is a qualified and trained professional? This too could reduce the stigma associated with behavioral health care, establish a superior behavioral health foundation, and enable the initiation of a continuous ongoing supportive environment for the patient, which is a protective factor for both mental and somatic health overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no questions from the committee, so thank you for your testimony. And colleagues, this will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 108. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. And thank you all. We're now going to turn to Senate Bill 59. Senator Hester is presenting Mental Health Benefit Exchange, Small Employers, Special Enrollment Period Marketing. And Senator, if you want to bring a panel up, you're welcome to do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. They're going, you go. No, you go. Okay. There you go.
Good afternoon, Chair Griffith. Feels good to say that. Madam Vice Chair Klausmeier and members of the committee, it's great to be here for the first time in finance this year. For the record, Senator Katie Fry Hester of District 9. I thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 59, which will improve our small businesses and other small employers' ability to offer health care through the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange. Colleagues, as you know, our state has done an amazing job reducing the rate of uninsured individuals in Maryland. However, we still have some gaps, and this bill is about fixing one of those gaps. Did you know that only 37% of small employers in Maryland currently are able to offer health insurance? Now, that's compared to 95% of the big organizations. And many of these employers are people who are part of our daily lives. It's the local coffee shop, the small church, the Main Street boutique. These are the businesses and organizations that struggle to offer their employees health insurance. Last year, for those of you who are here, you may remember that I introduced Senate Bill 632, which passed this committee unanimously. That bill at the time required the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange to study how the state could best achieve this goal of shrinking this gap from 37% to 95%. And over the course of the interim, the work group studied many different subsidy programs at the state level as well as the federal level. The work group ultimately determined that given SB 632's intent to fund their recommendations, the most cost-effective mechanism to achieve our goal would be to expand marketing of a federal program regarding the generous advanced premium tax credit. In short, what this tax credit does is it's a refundable tax credit established by the Affordable Care Act, which can be leveraged to reduce the out-of-pocket costs of insurance premiums. Now, the exact amount of this credit that an individual receives varies based on income and family size, but it generally brings the cost of insurance down to only 8.5% of income. So what this bill does is it establishes an outreach and marketing program specifically to these small employers so that they know how to help their employees take advantage of this federal tax credit. I do want to flag for the committee that there's been some concerns regarding the special enrollment period provisions, and so we have submitted an amendment which addresses those concerns by basically striking that special enrollment period. In closing, we know that small businesses have historically struggled to offer competitive and comprehensive benefits to their employees, and now we have a solution. We just have to make sure that the small employers know about it. With that, I respectfully request a favorable report of Senate Bill 59.
Thank you, Senator. We'll proceed with your panel, and let me just share with everyone, I think we have 17 people signed up to speak in support of this bill, so just wanted to let you know that. All right, you can proceed.
Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klausmeier, and members of the committee, I'm Stephanie Clapper, Deputy Director with Maryland Healthcare for All Coalition. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today in favor of Senate Bill 59. I am representing the Maryland Healthcare for All Coalition, which is made up of over 300 faith, business, labor, community, and healthcare organizations from across the state, all in support of this. Thanks to your committee's leadership, we've made great progress in Maryland covering the uninsured. We have over 400,000 people enrolled since the Affordable Care Act went into effect. And we're down to 6% uninsured. We cut the rate in half, but there's still more that we need to do. And this bill would make significant progress towards the goal of achieving 0% uninsured in Maryland. I served on the work group that made the recommendation for an outreach program for small employers and their employees to be connected with health coverage, and this bill would see that to fruition by investing $5 million per year into such a program. I was speaking with a small business owner who told me that he owns a business that creates food products, and many small food product business owners, there's an unspoken rule that coverage is just unaffordable. It's not something you're going to be able to offer to your employees. And for 2 years, he believed that until he saw through his payment processor that actually he could afford to offer health coverage, and he started to, and he saw that his employees started being able to visit the doctor when they were sick. Instead of just perpetually calling out, they could go get the underlying issue addressed. One of his employees started seeing a therapist for the first time in years, and now he's concerned that if there's an employee that underperforms or isn't the best fit, what happens to them if they leave? When he found out that there was a tax credit that he would have been eligible for much earlier, he wished he had known about it, and he wished that other small business owners knew the same thing so that his employees wouldn't feel like his small business is one of the only options if they need health coverage. So this bill could really help small employers like him and others just like him. So thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair Griffin. We're very excited to say that. My first time here since you've been chair, so congratulations. And other members of the committee, good to be here. My name is Willie Flowers. I'm president of the NAACP Maryland State Conference. Certainly a pleasure to speak here. I represent 25 branches in the state of Maryland, 2 in Baltimore County. And we're excited about the passage of this bill. The details of it, as you know, are $5 million for a 5-year period for outreach for small employers, and specifically about 501c3s are nonprofits who are kind of feel the brunt of all this. Speaking as one of those organizations, specifically my very small organization in Baltimore City, we had funding to do outreach for the program, and after the Affordable Care Act was passed, and I couldn't afford to keep the outreach workers, I couldn't afford to give them health care when they were doing outreach. So that's where it hits home to me. Other details of the bill are specific to the fact that overall, most of our businesses, small businesses, many of our small businesses in this state are women and black and brown owned businesses. And they, not only do they have that distinction, but they also hire more black and brown people. And to create that as a challenge for them as an employer, and to have employees who can't have health care is pretty atrocious. This bill helps to expand that, and we certainly push for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 59. I'm Johanna Fabian Marks, the Director of Policy and Plan Management at the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange. As you've heard, this bill grew out of a legislatively mandated work group that the exchange convened to examine how we could better support small businesses, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. We have a number of our work group members here today. I think it was a really productive, active, and engaged work group that included all of our key stakeholders. And as you've heard, they concluded that the gap that really needs to be fixed here is educating small businesses and their employees and connecting them to the affordable coverage that is out there. As you've also heard, we've done a great job reducing our uninsured rate, but we've still got about 350,000 uninsured individuals in the state. Census data indicates that about a third of them may be employed by small businesses. And so by ensuring that the exchange has funding to significantly expand marketing and outreach targeted at small businesses and nonprofits and their employees, as recommended by the work group, we would be able to implement a targeted marketing campaign that we'd pair with a really strong on-the-ground outreach effort, leveraging partnerships with authorized producers that the exchange already works with. So I think by investing in this type of outreach, we could both increase the number of individuals enrolled in health insurance in the state and support Maryland's small businesses in attracting and retaining employees and connecting them to coverage to keep them healthy and competitive. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
My name is Neil Bergsman. I am the Senior Policy Analyst for Maryland Nonprofits. And Madam Chair and Senators, I am particularly delighted to be here. I think the last time I spoke to this committee, I think Senator Riley was the chair. And long before that, I had the honor to briefly serve as staff to this committee when Senator Rasmussen was the chair. So I'm old. Maryland Nonprofits is the statewide network of all nonprofits with more than 1,700 member organizations across the state. Nonprofit organizations employ almost 13% of the state's private sector workforce, and that's more than any other sector except retail. So thousands of Maryland's small employers are nonprofit organizations. This bill provides some practical strategies for small employers, nonprofit and for-profit alike, to promote quality, affordable health coverage for their employees. In addition, it will help the clients and customers of our health-related nonprofits. Small business employees are one of the groups with significant numbers of uninsured Marylanders. In many cases, coverage would be available to these individuals at very low cost due to the state and federal incentives. Reducing the coverage gap will help the clients of nonprofits whose mission is to promote health, behavioral health, and overall quality of life. For these reasons, Maryland Nonprofits respectfully requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see questions for the sponsor or this panel, so thank you very much for your testimony. We're going to turn to Catherine Kirk Robbins and Lee.
Sorry, I testified on behalf of Catherine as well.
Okay, that's one down. All right. Lee Hudson, Matthew Celentano, Bryson Popham, and John Frank. You can all come on down. So we have Lee speaking favorable, and then several after that favorable with amendments. So, Lee Hudson?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to support access to health care in Maryland. My name is Lee Hudson. I'm the Assistant to the Bishop for Public Policy in the Delaware-Maryland Synod. We're a faith community in 3 judicatories across the state. You have our written, our primary interest is in getting people to the doctor. With your indulgence, a small personal vignette. When you are the only everything managing a small teensy operation, which is what a local church is in the eyes of our society, it's a big challenge to keep up. I think one of the banners for the state of Maryland from Governor Moore is that leave no one behind. So if we can get to this segment of our state that is still underrepresented in access to health care, it would be a very good thing. And for those reasons, my community asks your favorable support as well.
Good afternoon again. I'm still Matt Celentano, still here on behalf of the League of Life and Health Insurers, here favorable with amendment on Senate Bill 59. I always like following my good friend Lee Hudson. How can you say no to God, right? So it is certainly critical that small businesses are aware of the programs and potentially available subsidies to their employees. And I think the sponsor had mentioned one of our concerns is the special enrollment period, which carriers have concerns with. But one thing I was interested in was maybe aligning the bill with the federal subsidies. It is a 5-year program written in the bill, but as you all know, congressional enhanced subsidies that were just approved this past year will end after calendar year 2025. I think it would be appropriate to add language to look at what that means if those subsidies are not continued past 2025. I certainly don't think it would be beneficial for the exchange to be going out to the community trying to encourage small businesses to sign up for subsidy-improved health care if those congressional subsidies go away. So I think that it would be appropriate for us to take a look at that when the time comes. But with that, we are supportive of the bill with amendments, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure for me to be here. First time in 2023. I see some familiar faces around the room and some new faces as well on this very important bill. I am here today representing the Maryland Association of Health Underwriters, who were involved deeply in Senate Bill 632 last year. With me and appearing at my request to my left is Mr. John Frank, who served as the co-chair of the work group that you've heard referred to here. So he's going to have some interesting things, I think, to share with you there. Very quickly, I want to provide some context. I was happy to hear the earlier witness claim that he was old, so I don't have to. But I do want to take you back to 1993, because that was the first seminal event in this legislature where House Bill 1359 created the small group market reform that we have now today. And that is one of the subjects of this bill, small employer health insurance, 2 to 50 employers. The other was in 2010, when the Affordable Care Act passed in March of that year, you may recall. And the day after that, then Governor O'Malley enacted an executive order whereby that law would be implemented, and we were deeply involved in that as well. Those two subjects are important because they are really the subject of this bill, the small group health insurance and individual health insurance. We want both of them to thrive and prosper. And we were afraid last year, frankly, that there might be some imbalance or some competition in that, and that is why we supported the study that took place. I'm very happy that my colleague, Mr. Frank, was helping guide that process. I think this is a good result. I want to particularly thank the sponsor for offering her amendment on the special enrollment period. That's the one amendment that we are supporting, and you have Mr. Frank's written testimony. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Mr. Frank.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Senate Finance Committee. I served as the co-chairman of the work group that was formed out of Senate Bill 632 last year. The work group had 19 members across a broad, diverse group of Marylanders and stakeholders. We had 6 sessions in which we looked at both the individual market and the small group market with regards to providing a subsidy for small businesses and how that might work. And what we found was very interesting, because the small group subsidy program and the individual subsidy program actually came in conflict with each other. as a small business might provide health insurance, affordable health insurance to their employees who already had coverage through the exchange, thereby negating their ability to continue their subsidies from that standpoint. The committee came up with recommendations. We concluded our work in October, November, submitted it under the guidance of Senate Bill 632, both back to the Finance Committee as well as the governor, with the recommendations that we embark on an educational process with employers on the various options that are available to them, and that is the essence of this bill. The committee did not address special enrollment periods for small businesses. So we are here in support of the bill with that amendment to eliminate the special enrollment period. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
We'll now call forward Brett Linder, Glenn Arrington. And we have you signed up favorable with amendments. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Brett Leininger, testifying on behalf of NAIFA Maryland, which is the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, testifying in support of the bill as amended. We very much thank Senator Hester for taking the time to speak with us and listen to our concerns, and very supportive of the bill as amended. And we've, with me today, I have Glenn Arrington, who has a benefits consulting firm called Group Benefit Strategies, based out of Bel Air, Maryland, my hometown, so near and dear to my heart. Glenn is also the president-elect of the Board of Directors for NAIFA Maryland and served on the work group that was mentioned before. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Arrington.
Well, thank you for having me, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Senate Finance Committee. I've been involved in health and life insurance now for 28 years. I worked for the carrier for 10 years. Which was Mamsie Optimum Choice, which then became United Healthcare. And that's when I started my firm in 2004. So I've been operating as an independent agent and agency for 19 years. And I was also part of the Senate Bill 632 work group, very active member of that. And we determined, after looking at how small group has evolved over the years and the individual market and the individual exchange, that what my colleague John Frank stated, we did run into situations where the individual market is maybe some better for some small employers. I deal with it every day, where I evaluate whether it's better for a small employer to have individual policies and set up a HRA reimbursement arrangement, or potentially go into the small group market. And it just depends upon the income level of the employees, and that's what I have to evaluate for each one of those small employers. Most of my book of business out of 250 clients that I have in small group are in that small group, so I deal with it every day. And we are in favor of the bill to do more outreach so that more small business owners are aware that brokers and producers and the small group market can thrive, and also as alternatives to potentially go into the Maryland Health Exchange when it's available. But we are in favor of the bill with the amendment, and I sent an email personally as well to Senator Hester, and Chief of Operations responded, and I was thankful to get that email that they put the amendment in, because the special election period, just for those of you that don't know, if somebody leaves an employer, they get what they call a certificate of coverage. That certificate of coverage will allow them to enroll in a group policy with the other employer that they go to. And anybody who did not enroll in a plan, if they were with an employer that didn't offer benefits, it's been around since 2014. They had ample time to elect a individual policy, either on the exchange or off the exchange. And then also Maryland is implementing the new Easy Enroll, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, so that they can actually fill that on their tax returns this year. So that's what I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see any questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are going to move to virtual witnesses. We'll start with Kenneth Phelps, Lorraine Ericat, and Jamal Lee. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the Finance Committee. I am Ken Phelps. I'm the co-director of the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this bill. Right up front, the Episcopal Church supports comprehensive health care, recognizes the need for universal and equitable health care access for all, and urges all Episcopalians, all of us actually, to advocate for that adequate health care, along with nutrition and housing as human rights that should be provided to all those residing in our nation, including the undocumented. If I may turn theologian for just a moment and take a little different tack. One of the better kept secrets in the church is the meaning of the word salvation. It's been muddied by our tradition and Western individualism, and it has nothing to do with an afterlife. The word from the Greek simply means healing, which simply means that our movement's founder, his primary mission was to bring healing to the world, to model what it meant to be dedicated to the spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical health of everyone, to be dedicated to wholeness and provide and promote that as gift. We support this bill because it is one more small step in what we hope are many more in moving us toward universal care for all. Again, our Christian mandate. And we know the arguments for this bill. It will help reduce the overall uninsured rate in the state. It will support Maryland's small employers who want to ensure that their employees have coverage that they need. It'll help make their employment opportunities that much more attractive to those seeking work who, again, need affordable health benefits for themselves and their families. It's a win for everyone. Now, I mentioned earlier human rights. The sin of our nation is that we have monetized, commodified so many of life's necessities: education, health, housing, things that other nations provide for their citizens. So I want you to also think of this bill as one more small step toward redeeming our culture as well. We call upon you to continue the progress we've made in this state. The Diocese of Maryland requests a favorable report, and on her behalf, I thank you for your time. God bless.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions, so thank you and have a good afternoon. We'll move on to Lorraine Ericat.
Thank you, Chair Griffith and the members of the Senate Finance Committee for the opportunity to testify in support for Senate Bill 59. My name is Lorraine Aricat, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with 1199 SEIU United Healthcare Workers East. We represent over 10,000 members here in Maryland and Washington, D.C. 1199 SEIU healthcare workers are in hospitals, clinics, and long-term care settings across the state. They are on the front lines providing quality care for our loved ones, and they know firsthand what happens to patients who fall through the healthcare system's gaps. Healthcare workers in Maryland thrive when our healthcare systems do three things: strengthen its workforce, invest in health equity and public health measures, and three, increase access to affordable healthcare and address barriers to health coverage. Senate Bill 59 is a pathway to increase access to health coverage by opening a special enrollment period and directing funds strategically to outreach and marketing. For small businesses, organizational success depends on employee health. Senate Bill 59 addresses health equity and reduces barriers to health coverage. And for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. No questions, so enjoy your afternoon. All right, we'll turn to Jamal Lee. Good afternoon.
Hi, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Very nice to see you. Thanks for having me on here virtually. I really appreciate it. My name is Jamal Lee, and I own a small business in Laurel, Maryland. Offering health coverage has been one of my top priorities for my employees. And I thank you to the Finance Committee for the leadership in the last year in passing legislation to create a work group on how to best help small businesses and their employees access health coverage. I was proud to serve on that work group, and as we met to carry out our changes in federal law resulted in our recommendations that Maryland invest in an outreach program to small businesses and their employees. SB 59 builds on that on the work group's recommendation about creating a 5-year outreach program that would include education and training regarding existing coverage options. Our people perish from lack of knowledge, and too many of our small businesses aren't aware of the choices that are available to them under the Maryland Health Connection for Small Business program. And too many of our employees are unaware of the financial help available to them in the individual market. This outreach program would help bridge that gap in knowledge and ensure that our workers are healthy and focused on producing great products here in Maryland and the United States. As a small business owner building Maryland and contributing to the growth of our country, I am hopeful that you will provide a favorable report to Senate Bill 59. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. There are no questions, so enjoy your day. We'll turn to Jake Whitaker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jake Whitaker, Director of Government Affairs at the Maryland Hospital Association, here to testify in support of Senate Bill 59. I couldn't have summarized the bill better than Senator Hester and her panel, so I'll be brief. We believe that widely accessible health coverage is critical to hospitals providing Marylanders with the best care possible. The outreach program specified in this bill has the potential to significantly increase the number of individuals who otherwise would not have the information necessary to enroll in critical health coverage. As strong proponents of expanding access to health coverage, including health plans offered in the individual market, the medical assistance program, and small group plans, Maryland hospitals are in strong support of Senate Bill 59. So for the aforementioned reasons, we respectfully request a favorable report for Senate Bill 59. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, and you are actually the last witness to testify on Senate Bill 59 today. So thank you and all of the others for your testimony, and enjoy your day. Members, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 59. We're now going to turn to Senate Bill 117. Senator Ellis, State Highway Administration, Litter Collection and Mowing. And Senator, you're bringing your panel up, which is great. Thank you very much. You can begin when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair Griffith and Vice Chair Klausmeier and colleagues, members of the Senate Finance Committee. I'm Senator Arthur Ellis from the 28th Legislative District of Charles County, here today to present Senate Bill 117, which calls for the State Highway Administration to clean up a lot of our dirty highways. I'm here with Dr. Jen Roberts, who's a newly tenured faculty member at University of Maryland College Park, my alma mater, and she just have a tremendous testimony, so I will make my presentation short. And you know, I started my career as a janitor when I was 13 years old, cleaning up streets, buildings, sidewalks in New York, and so I just love to have things clean and orderly. And when I drive on a lot of our streets throughout Maryland, I see, I'm talking about state highways, I see a lot of trash all over the place, and it just always bothers me. And I just, this is my second year putting this bill, and I know this past summer, members of the General Assembly call up the news media, bring their attention to it, and then the State Highway comes out and clean up some of the roads, and then the attention dies down and the roads get messy again. And, you know, I think we're the General Assembly. We can get the resources, and we can give the resource to the State Highway Administration to clean up our roadways. So next slide, please. Yeah, the purpose of this bill, of course, is to, require the state highway to put the resources in to, first thing, to pick up the trash, and then to cut the grass. And it's important to do it in that order. Sometimes you'll see them cut the grass while the trash is in there. So instead of having 1,000 pieces of litter, you now have 55,000 pieces of litter, and it just makes things worse. The grass will be cut, but so is the trash. And, you know, it's important that, you know, they get some direction, because right now everyone seems to do what they want to do when they want to do it. And a lot of our community members are up in arms about our dirty highways. I see a lot of Facebook posts from folks, you know, taking pictures of 95 or Indian Head Highway or Route 32, you know, and just posting it and saying, look at this, why aren't we as a state taking this serious? So we can make a difference. So last year, I believe I introduced this bill. State Highway said it will cost $10 million in extra funds to clean up our highways. This year, they're saying it's $20 million. So, okay, seems very arbitrary, capricious, you know, how the numbers changed tremendously. That's way ahead of inflation. Inflation's been running like 9.5%. So to go from 10 million last year to 20 million this year, that's like a 100% inflation rate. And so it's just something they don't want to do, and I'm shocked that they State Highway put an unfavorable letter, so we don't want to clean up the highways. Leave us alone. Let's keep going, and it just seems totally unacceptable. And this bill, next slide, please. Okay. This bill calls for, you know, work with contractors to do it. To get the work done, to pick up the trash and cut the grass. This was under the old model from the last administration, the Hogan administration, which they hired contractors inefficiently, but hired contractors to do it. I know one of my first act as senators was 4 years ago, was to meet with the State Highway Administration, the engineer in charge of the Southern Maryland region, and I worked with them to do exactly what I wanted to do statewide, to do in Charles County, in Waldorf. And so for the last 4 years, they hired a contractor, and they cut the grass and pick up the trash according to this schedule, which I put in this bill. And it's made a huge difference in our community. I believe we can expand that statewide with the proper resources. Next slide, please. And so under the current Moore administration, there is a commitment of the governor to bring more of the work for state agencies to the state government, to state employees. And our state workers union support this bill with the amendment to, instead of having contractors do the work, to have state employees do it. And I think that's a commitment from the governor also. So I'm willing to amend that bill according to the suggestions from AFSCME and the intent of the governor to, instead of, say, have these contractors do it, to have state employees do it, to really bring in the workers in order to clean up our roadways. Next slide, please. And why is this important? So we have a lot of beautiful areas in Maryland. They're tourist destinations. And these tourists come in from all over the country into Maryland. And the question is, on the way to beautiful Mallows Bay, which is in Charles County, which is the newest national environmental area, national designation, just a beautiful place in Charles County, to whether it's the Inner Harbor in Baltimore or going to Ocean City, or so many of our destinations, MGM in Prince George's County, or the National Harbor there. You know, we want them to have a good impression of Maryland when they come into our state. We want it to be like North Carolina. So I drive through North Carolina from time to time, especially when my kids were in their travel teams with their sports. In North Carolina, just a beautifully clean state. And why is that? They have funds designated to clean up the highways in North Carolina, and we can extend that to Florida. They have intentional attention to clean up the highways because it's very important. Not just for visitors, we want to do it for our residents and our citizens also. And I know Dr. Roberts will touch on that part and how important it is for our citizens to drive through, walk streets that are clean and grass well maintained and well cut. So all that, being said, I will end my testimony and ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 117. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, and members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of Senate Bill 117. I'm here as an associate professor of kinesiology and director of the Public Health Outcomes and Effects of the Built Environment Laboratory at the School of Public Health, University of Maryland, College Park. Before I share with you why it is vitally important to support Senate Bill 117, I'll tell you briefly about my background. My work and research examines the impact of built, social, and natural environments, including the institutional and structural inequities of these environments on the public health outcomes of marginalized communities. More than 55 years ago, as part of a pet project of First Lady Bird Johnson, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Highway Beautification Act. This act encouraged scenic enhancement by providing funding for cleanup and green space landscaping along the roadways. However, the First Lady believed that beauty had a real social utility. She was quoted as saying, quote, "The subject of beautification is like a tangled skein of wool. All the threads are interwoven, recreation and pollution and mental health. And the crime rate and rapid transit in parks and everything leads to something else," unquote. While First Lady Johnson spoke of the interwoven threads of pollution, health, and crime, my work, as well as the work of others, have identified and documented these significant associations through research. Research has shown neighborhood disorders such as the presence of litter, overgrown grass, and dense brush can negatively impact community health. Aside from the undeniable issues of aesthetics, litter can cause human health problems by attracting rats and other pests that may carry disease. This bill addresses more than just an eyesore of our unkept roads. Senate Bill 117 will establish the administration infrastructure needed to promote health and wellness for Maryland residents by upholding and monitoring the maintenance of our state and interstate highways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no questions from the committee. We have no further witnesses. So thank you both. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 117.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, we'll now turn to our final bill of the day, Senate Bill 90. Senator Kramer, Commercial Law, Consumer Protection, Telephone Solicitation, Stop the Spam Calls Act of 2023. Senator, good afternoon, and you can feel free to bring any panelist forward that you would like.
Good evening to you, Madam Chair. You are looking at the extent of the panel. And Ben Kramer here to introduce, pardon me, Madam Chair. This may be important, excuse me. Hello? Yes, what? Adult protective undergarments? No. No, I am not interested. But leopard skin? No, do not call me again. Spam call, Madam Chair. Colleagues, those of you who are left here in the room, we all know how annoying, bothersome spam calls are, and we know the frequency with which we get those calls. Maryland is the #1 state in the nation for the most consumer complaints to the Federal Trade Commission for spam calls. In 1999, Time magazine did a poll of the worst ideas of the 20th century. Telemarketing was 4th on that list, coming out ahead of the Titanic, the Treaty of Versailles, and the Boston Red Sox decision to trade Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. Our constituents are tired. They are weary of being bombarded by spam calls. Therefore, I have the bill before you. What would the bill do. First of all, and I will share with you, this bill is modeled identically to one in Oklahoma, which was modeled on a bill from Florida, which is very similar to bills that have been introduced in total and passed in 11 states that have said enough is enough. We've got to do something. And I will also proffer to you that this bill is not going to be the answer. It is a tool. It is an opportunity for us to take a bite out of spam. The first thing the bill does is that it would require prior written consent from the consumer before they could receive a robocall. It lays out the process for what that written agreement would entail, and then it provides limitations as to how this could be done. The first of those is that, bear with me. The entity cannot hide its phone number. It cannot conceal the caller identification so that the individual, the consumer, knows the call is coming from a particular entity. It also requires that the incoming call cannot have any altering of the voice, which is becoming more commonplace now with voice-altering technology. So if you're getting a call from someone representing they are such and such a person, and it's been technology has changed that voice, that would be prohibited. It also provides that the hours of these calls would be limited between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. so that families can be left alone in their evenings when they're with their children, mom and dad, all sitting around enjoying the evening. They would not get calls after 8 p.m. It would also limit the number of calls to a total of 3 times within a 24-hour period from the same caller. There is an exemption to the legislation, and that exemption is, and bear with me one moment, it does not apply to non-commercial entities, telephone solicitations for religious, charitable, political, or educational purposes. They would be exempted out, as has been done in most of the other states that have passed legislation. There is also a exemption for certain business-to-business entities, although there would still be some application. And finally, the penalties for doing this would be that it is an unfair, abusive, or deceptive trade practice within our consumer protection statute. And that pretty much, colleagues, is the bill before you. Needless to say, my introduction of this bill with the cross-file, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, has made sure that there is no lobbyist that is unemployed this session. And there have been a number of concerns that have been brought to my attention. And within reason, colleagues, there is some work that can be done to ensure that we are not pulling in those entities that are doing things legitimately. For instance, when you have an existing relationship with a business and that entity wants to communicate information, your prescription's been filled, your insurance premium has not been paid, your policy's going to expire. For those kinds of informational calls, robocalls, we are going to work out language that would make it clear that is not part of this legislation. I will also, just before I finish, bring to your attention that the definition, by virtue of the definition in statute right now of a telephone solicitation, is the following: selling, leasing, renting goods or services, attempting to sell, lease, or rent goods or services, an offer, attempt to offer a gift or prize, attempting to conduct a poll, and request or attempt to request survey information. So a lot of the concerns that have been brought to my attention, just by virtue of the definition, those concerns are not applicable to the bill, and they would not be pulled into the sanctions in the bill. But just the same, the House Cross File and I will be sitting down with our friends seated behind me, and we'll work out those details. With that, committee, happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, I see no questions from the committee.
It must be brilliant legislation then, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
It's resonating.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to call up the next group of witnesses. I have 3 signed up favorable with amendments: Brett Leininger, Bob Enton, Jason Weintraub. Good afternoon. Come on down.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Brett Leininger here today on behalf of the Independent Insurance Agents of Maryland. We are the producers who sell property and casualty insurance to individuals and to businesses. Think auto insurance, homeowners, business insurance. And thank you to the sponsor for taking the time to discuss some of our issues. I didn't think it would apply to my client. However, as time has gone on and innovation has taken place, some insurance agencies are communicating with their current customers, both commercial customers and individual customers, to notify them that their policies are about to, that it's time for renewal, they're about to lapse. So it's a communication with the current client, whether it's a business or if it's an individual. So that can be done via text or can be done via an automatic phone call. Others have not chosen to do that. They feel like that it's less personal, but I think that's just the business decision that is being made. So with that, we would like to be able to address those issues. I don't know specifically what. I've offered some suggestions in the written testimony, but very much look forward to working with the sponsor as we kind of work through the minutia of the legislation. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. I've discussed this bill with Senator Kramer as well as Delegate Vaughn Stewart, and we are favorable with amendments. We appreciate the senator's acknowledgement about calls from existing from businesses that have an existing relationship with the recipient of the call. You know, for the Bankers Association, and I have a number of credit cards, I have a mortgage with one bank, I have a checking account with another bank. You they do reach out, and sometimes it is an automated call which says, please call this fraud number, for instance. Please call this number regarding possible fraud with your account. I've gotten those calls. I've not gotten calls, just cold calls soliciting me for, to open an account or to purchase anything. But I do get calls, sometimes in that regard. So I think if we can work that language out with Senator Kramer, that would be great. And our members are taking a very close look at this, particularly our members that do business all over the country. And we want to make sure that they're not unnecessarily unreasonably restricted. But I feel very, very confident that we'll work out any differences with the sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Beidel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a little interest in the insurance side of things, as you can expect.
Thought you might, Senator.
Yeah. So how about someone that's recently left your agency? Maybe you didn't even realize their number's still in your file, but now they've left your agency and gone to. Could there be a problem where you have a violation just because this person recently?
I think that's certainly, you know better than I, but I would imagine that's a scenario that we would have to kind of tease out.
And the other question I have, I can see where you would call to do a review or call because of a premium due, but I used to make calls when a big storm was coming to say to people, there's a hurricane this weekend. If you need any help with a claim, please call my cell phone. And, that's not like personal just to you, that would be to the entire agency. Is that going to be allowed?
I think based on what the sponsor said, Senator Kramer said, that would be more along the lines of informational. Not having looked at that specific scenario, but I think that probably the intent is it would fall under that scenario.
And I have a quick question for the sponsor. How about candidate calls at election? Are they included in this, or we can keep making robocalls as long as we want?
I think that as a pattern in the bills in other states, if they wanted to get the bill passed, they exempted out political calls, so that remains untouched. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon. We now have, I guess Jason wasn't coming. Yep, you're good.
Covered us for the bankers.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Okay, thank you. All right. I have Davion Percy and Rob Garagiola. Signed up in opposition to the bill. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, respective members of the committee. For the record, Davion Percy with Percy Public Affairs, and today I'm here before you representing the Maryland Retail Energy Suppliers Association in opposition to SB 90. I will keep this very brief because we already submitted written testimony. Our members include energy companies like Constellation, Calpine, IGS, Vistra, and more. And marketing and education through phone calls is a core part of their business. To prevent these phone calls, we believe it will hamper the ability to a significant level of our members to be able to educate Marylanders on energy choice and help them get lower rates. And therefore, we ask for an unfavorable report, and I'll just keep it there. You can refer to the written testimony. Thank you.
Great. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Rob Garagiola with Compass Advocacy. Here on behalf of CTIA, National Wireless Telecommunications Association, respectfully in opposition to this bill as well. I've talked to Senator Kramer a little bit about this, and they also provided written testimony, but I'll highlight a few things of that here momentarily. So again, CTIA wholeheartedly agrees with the intent of the legislation. They've been very active over the years, and their members have been very active, working with the 51 attorneys generals across the country, working with the FTC, FCC, and others to try to tackle unwanted calls. They don't believe in spam either, But there are a lot of unintended consequences potentially with this legislation that could affect a number of businesses. You heard from two associations earlier, and then Mr. Percy's client as well. There are a lot of other businesses that are making legitimate calls or text messages that, with some of the definitions in the bill, it could dramatically impact kind of how they conduct their business in the state. In addition, the wireless industry, they've worked to upgrade network management processes, create new technology initiatives, and as I mentioned, have collaborated with federal and state law enforcement. There's been a lot of attention to this from wireless providers like AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, who've developed and deployed a caller ID authentication technology, commonly referred to as STIR/SHAKEN, which is Secure Telephone Identity Revisited and signature-based handling of asserted information using tokens. These are things that have been around now for about 7 or 8 years, and that continues to get refined as technology changes. And I raise that because I want you to understand that the telecommunications industry has taken this seriously. Obviously, there's things that still get through. And with that, Madam Chair and members of the committee, we look forward to working with you and with the sponsor to see if we can make improvements to this legislation.
Thank you very much. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. George, you mentioned something about using tokens. What does that mean?
There's a identification authentication technology that's commonly referred to as STIR/SHAKEN. And from a technological standpoint, I don't know definitively what tokens are, but it's part of the definition of that is used to identify, when you're getting a call on your phone, oftentimes I'll get a message that'll say potential spam or unwanted call. And I think the same occurs with text messages as well. So there's a whole infrastructure that's out there, both in the private sector, but also being done in collaboration with federal authorities, FCC and FTC, and also with the attorneys generals of Maryland as well as other states.
Yeah, I'm always curious about the technology, trying to keep up with stuff. I started out my career in the Air Force in communications, the technical part, programming and stuff like that. So if you could reach out to me with tokens and how does that work and how does it control?
Happy to do that.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 90. It also completes our work for the day. Thank you, colleagues. Meeting adjourned.